Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ion Canon podcast, your home for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. All right, guys, picture this. The year is 1991. The Star Wars trilogy ended nearly almost a decade ago. Star Wars fans have been left for dry on their favorite characters of Luke, Han, and Leia. And while we have been feasting well on Ewoks the movies, Ewoks the show, and droids, we still yearn for our favorite trio. But thankfully, Lucasfilm heard our pleas, and George Lucas, or whoever was in charge of publishing at the time, gave that mission to an unlikely sci-fi author named Timothy Zahn to continue the adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia. That's right, folks. We're talking about it. To many, what people consider the original sequel trilogy. We're here to talk about the Thrawn Trilogy. And joining us, as you can see, is our good friend, Mr. Dominic Jones from the Star Wars Underworld podcast.
Hey, Joel.
Woo!
I think we have to call the show Ion Legends tonight. I don't think we can be Ion Canon. I think we gotta change it up, be Ion Legends, and because that's what we're talking about. We're going back. I think it was Howard Rothman. I think Howard Rothman was the guy who was sort of tasked. He was sort of overseer of Lucasfilm licensing, and so I think that led to he maybe didn't pick Zahn, but he picked the guy who picked the guy who picked Zahn, and that led us to the Thrawn trilogy that we're going to talk about. That I'm excited to get into it. Those books, yeah, I've reread them last year or earlier this year, I guess. Last year into earlier this year. They hold up, man. They're just a rollicking adventure.
Well, don't
Separate
spoil
from
your thoughts just
yeah,
yet. I'll ask you later, but
yeah. I mean, like separate from issues of canon and what should be
oh
the
yeah.
official story, blah blah. Who cares?
Mhm.
They're just fun. They're fun, good stories that are a nice, appropriate continuation of the saga of the
Right.
trilogy. I guess we should say.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, we won't give away our cards completely just yet. Of course, everybody, thank you for joining us. You can follow us at Ion Cannon on Blue Sky. Let's see. I think we're doing I think Matthew's doing a tractor beam this week. I actually forgot. Or maybe we were taking a break. I don't remember. I think they might be taking a break, but I don't remember. I wish Matthew was in the comments right now. If you want to find out, you can just watch the last tractor beam, which I was on. Actually, I got to be on the last tractor beam, talking about the Rise of Skywalker comic, the main line, and some weird comic book news that was going on that we're trying to figure out.
Mhm.
So be on the look. So check out that from last week. Matthew will be back next week. But as always, we're going to begin with a week in Star Wars. Now, I had a week in Star Wars, but you know what? I'm going to let Dominic, our guest, begin because I took a while to think of what I wanted to talk about. So, Dominic, you're the guest. What was your week in Star Wars?
So I have two things. One is pretty quick. One
Okay.
is pretty quick, and it has to do with something behind me
Ooh.
on the shelf here
Ooh.
because this week tomorrow
Mhm.
the final book in the High Republic, final adult novel in the High
Mhm.
Republic, Trials of the Jedi, comes out, and last Friday, my local bookstore. Actually, not a local bookstore; it's a big chain, but the one that I go to,
Right.
they called me up and said, "We've got your copy," and I asked no further questions and went and picked it up right away. So you can see I'm about
Damn.
halfway through the book. Book's about
You're gonna
400
finish
something
before
pages.
Matthew, aren't you? You're
Oh, I'm gonna finish before Matthew reads page 1. That is my intention. That is my
nice.
intention here, Joel. But it has been thus far, again, about halfway through the book.
Mhm.
Uh, pretty good uh conclusion so
Mhm.
far. It's got kind of Avengers vibes. You're really bringing together the characters of the High Republic
Mhm.
from the various different stories. You got
Mhm.
characters from the Adventures comics, from the main Marvel comics, from the adult novels, from the YA novels. Junior
Mhm.
novels, not so much, but like everybody's kind of coming together. Characters who were big in phase 1 and phase 3,
Mhm.
and characters who were big in phase 2 as well. Uh, it's it's looking pretty good. There's some exciting cliffhangers, and I'm looking forward to finishing it in the next couple of days, and
Mhm.
hopefully being able to write a review for this week for my Substack hot off the press, which you can find at dominicgjones.substack.com if you want to read that. So that was my first thing. That's my first thing. Second thing, and this Joel, I want your take on this.
Sure, yeah.
This also relates to something that I was writing about this week.
Ooh,
so
nice.
I published this week. I've been doing this series where I rewatch the Clone Wars,
Right.
roughly monthly. There were a couple months off there, celebration or where we kind of didn't really do it, but got back into it and posted my piece on Shadow of Malevolence.
Yeah.
And that's an episode, if people don't remember it. Anakin and Ahsoka and Y-Wings, they attack the Malevolence.
Yeah.
And he has to like sort of learn a lesson in leadership. That just because he can do something doesn't mean that's best for the crew. Doesn't mean that's best for the people that he's working with. And learns this lesson. And in my piece, I write about how Anakin learns this important lesson in leadership and blah, blah, blah. And then a few days later, I go on one of those micro blogging websites. I can't remember what it's called. It might have been a bird at one point. And I see people posting about, people romanticizing Anakin Skywalker. And I don't think, to be clear, I don't think this has anything to do with anything I wrote. I think this is a conversation that cropped up independently because Star Wars fans, I think we are all connected through the cosmic force in some way. And we're all kind of thinking about the same things at the same time. So people are talking about, like, should we romanticize Anakin Skywalker because he is, after all, Darth Vader. He's a killer, a maniac, a genocidal guy. Like, he's not, there's a point in his life where he's a real bad dude. And specifically, people were specifically saying, like, the Clone Wars did this. They romanticized Anakin. And I have a thought on this, but I'm curious to know your thought on this, Joel, about the idea of romanticizing Anakin Skywalker, making him into this swashbuckling hero when we know ultimately where he winds up and what he does and how people react and respond to the swashbuckling heroic version of him who does, learn some lessons along the way and could be something that people aspire to, knowing that ultimately he does become Darth Vader.
It's an interesting thing, and weirdly enough, funny enough, I think also Darth Vader has this problem too, where you don't, because I do think people have accused, especially a lot of the comics, of badassifying Darth Vader. It's like, look at Darth Vader, he's doing the jumps and the kicks, and he's kind of still a badass, taking on those rebels. And with Anakin, it's interesting, especially because, and I do think that we have to be honest with ourselves. Anakin in the Clone Wars is a little bit of a soft reboot. It's a little bit of a difference of the kind of the whiny teen, or attack the clones, or the kind of the erratic, sometimes erratic, and by the end kind of guy we see in Revenge of the Sith, who's like, oh my god, my wife's about to die, I'm gonna gotta do something. And I don't quite know. I mean, there are definitely some good episodes of we see Anakin's dark side a little bit more subtly, like with Clovis, where there's definitely some borderline, maybe, I don't know, domestic abuse going on with Padme. I don't know, questionable. It's tough. It's tough because I think on the one hand, you want to make it a tragedy of Anakin's folly, but at the same time go too far and you almost root for Anakin. And I think, I think there are people in the fandom, and I know this is true because I've seen blogs about this, and they're really interesting blogs about, like, there are people who don't really blame Anakin for his fall. They kind of blame everything around him, like they Obi-Wan, the Jedi, and whether or not Palpatine, and whether or not those things definitely factor into, the fall. At the end of the day, Anakin made his choice. He's got to live with it. So, yeah, sorry, I'm not giving you like a good straight answer here, but it's an interesting development, and I think I think about balance. You don't want to overly romanticize Anakin, but I think you gotta also remember. But I think they want to be a little bit more subtle in his. He was a good friend. Obi-Wan did have good memories, and this was once a good guy. But I think you also got to remember this guy's also very, very flawed. He's kind of selfish. He's in this toxic relationship with Padme. I'm going to say it's a toxic relationship. I think that's the point. And he's got problems. And he has got a lot of problems. Some, unfortunately, because of his upbringing. Some are just things that he himself never learned to get over with. So yeah, that's kind of my cheap answer of find balance, which I think is a very Star Warsy answer.
It is. It is. So here's where I come down on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's okay for a show like the Clone Wars to do this because they're setting up a specific set of emotions for the characters at the end when the turn happens. So, like you said, Obi-Wan refers to Anakin, he's a cunning warrior, a great star pilot, and he was a good friend. Yeah. So Obi-Wan has this view of Anakin where there were a lot of good times. We didn't really see those good times in the movies. You need to see them in the show. So that's one thing. The other thing is everyone who knows and loves Anakin, be it romantically like Padme or platonically like Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, when they hear the truth about Anakin, they want to deny it. Their immediate reaction is to deny it. Obi-Wan tells Padme, what's her reaction? No, it couldn't. Not Anakin. He couldn't. Ahsoka gets told by Darth Maul, this is what's going to happen. This is what Palpatine's plan is. Her reaction is, you lie. You lie.
Right.
Obi-Wan has to look at the security camera footage because he knows it's Anakin, but he doesn't want to believe it. Right? That's why Yoda tells him, if into the security holograms you go, only pain will you find.
Right.
So he's not telling him that because everything's going to be because they genuinely don't know. They both know the truth. But they have built up Anakin in their minds. They all believed in Anakin, that he was the chosen one, that he was the great hero, whatever they wanted to call it, whatever they want to say it. They all believed in Anakin. And so we as the audience need to believe in him too. And so the Clone Wars can romanticize him. They can show him learning these lessons. They can show him as the great hero that Obi-Wan talked about in A New Hope. But like you hit on, it also shows us his flaws. It shows us those moments where he does tap into the dark side. And we saw in the films those moments, right? With the Tusken Raiders and Count Dooku and everything. We see these moments. So everybody wants to believe in Anakin because they see all those good things. And we as the audience want to believe in Anakin, but we see all these good things. But much in the same way that the characters are aware in the back of their minds that there are some things that are a little bit not right with Anakin, we as the audience are aware that he ultimately is going to become Darth Vader.
Right.
And so the Clone Wars can romanticize it, and people can look up to him and think, wow, isn't that great? Because that makes the fall harder. Because we, like Obi-Wan, like Ahsoka, like Padme, want to believe in Anakin. So then it hurts more because we knew that it was there. We knew the possibility for him to fall was there. And then we see it in Revenge of the Sith. And, George says, art is emotion. And like the emotion he's putting into his movie here, into his art is, wanting to believe in the hero, wanting to believe in him to be the chosen one, to bring balance to the Force. And instead, he rug pulls us all and we're all devastated, but we're also all blaming ourselves a little bit because we should have seen the signs. We shouldn't have been like Obi-Wan and Padme. They can blame themselves because they're like, oh, we should have stopped it. We as the audience are blaming ourselves a little bit because we shouldn't have let the rug be pulled out from under us. So we should have seen the signs because we did see the signs. We knew it was possible. So that's my thought on that, on the romanticization of Anakin Skywalker. I think it doesn't just allow people to, like a character, which you can just like a character. It doesn't friggin' matter. You don't have to justify it to me. You can just like a character, but it's like part of the, it's part of the experience. It's part of the story to believe in this guy.
Right. I think that's such a great point. And, this is something I think we could do a whole topic about in the future of like perspective on Star Wars. Because I think we as fans, I think some of us, not all of us, but I think some of us have a little too much of a Star Wars. Every Star Wars we see is very omnipresent. This is the facts of the story, kind of like that. And I just don't believe that because, like, I think of like Anakin's redemption, and the original trilogy is a very Luke centric story.
Mhm.
So when we see Anakin as the Force Ghost, it's like, hey, the Force Ghost, he's okay now. He is, he's looking at his kid, going, "Good job, son. You
Yeah.
kicked my butt. You kicked the Emperor's butt." Right? So all is forgiven.
Yeah.
Have that perspective go to Leia, go to random person on the street, go to Afra, go to somebody else, go to Ahsoka even.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's, Leia's like, that's not my father. That's the man who tortured me and just killed my father and destroyed my home. Afra's like, that's the guy who's been, on my butt for years, always recruiting me as one of his sidekicks. And Ahsoka's like, I got complicated feelings. The last time I met my master, he tried to kill me.
Mhm.
So Anakin's like happy Force Ghost, lucky days. A little bit more complicated from their perspective story. So yeah,
Mhm.
I 100% agree. That's such a great point. And that's something I think we could talk about in the future some other time.
Certainly.
So for my week of Star Wars, I have been having such a sorry about the light, by the way. The sun will go away in a couple hours. I've been having a great time rewatching the Disney Plus shows with my dad. Kind of since
Nice.
we have a break now, we're on Andor season 2. We just finished the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. I'm about to call it The
Nice.
Mandalorian Grogu. And you know what? Mandalorian season 1 and 2 are pretty fantastic. I think
Yeah.
they are like the best versions of that show,
Mhm.
bar none. And I think it's kind of easy to forget that as we get more distance and we get all the other shows and whatnot. I'm actually kind of curious to go to Mando season 3 and Book of Boba Fett because, like with you and Ahsoka, I got lots of problems, and I'm kind of wondering, am I building this up in my head, or am I, especially with Mando season 3, am I building so much of this up in my head, or like I have not watched them since the premiere, so I'm kind of like curious just to kind of see, like, oh, I do think there's a lot of interesting things in here. But those first 2 seasons definitely of The Mandalorian and Grogu.
Mhm.
Darn it, I did talk that. Mandalorian are pretty damn swell.
Mhm.
And I do think they were worse being big zeitgeist heavy hitters back when they came out. I think we
Mhm.
forget that.
Oh yeah.
So, I think we've been pitting, things like The Mandalorian against Andor for a while, and I think we forget, like, I get if you have your problem with season 3, I do too, but those first 2 seasons were pretty peak. And I think if we just
They were.
and I think if we can just get back, not even just pretty peak, but just pretty solid, I think we're gonna have a good time with the Mandalorian Grogu film. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just been my experience rewatching the show. I'm gonna try and rewatch the other ones with my dad to see what we're doing. We're on Andor season 2 right now. I'm trying to get into the Gorman episodes because those are my favorite. So yeah, that's just been my experience, and I've
Mhm.
enjoyed rewatching it. I like kind of revisiting it because I don't, and I think the more you rewatch something, kind of the more you get more comfortable with it. Star Wars is
Mhm.
Star Wars on the rewatch, as a friend of mine once said.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right that the movie is going to be more like seasons 1 and 2.
I think so.
Um, the trailer that they showed us at Celebration that I'm sure everybody saw that leaked online at one point, um, it definitely gives off that vibe, right? It begins with a one take action sequence
Mhm.
with Mando just taking out everybody within a small enclosed space. I'm trying to speak vaguely here. And
Yeah, I know
as
what it is. Wink,
yeah,
wink.
yeah. And as the trailer plays out some more, you
Mhm.
get more sequences that feel perhaps like a scaled up version
Mhm.
of Mando season 1 and season 2, but it's still the tone of it
Mhm.
and the vibe of it is much more season 1 and season 2 than season 3. The final shot in the arena, right? Like we
Yeah.
go into an arena in season 2 in the premiere, and
Mhm.
it's two naked Gamorreans punching each other, and there's maybe 5 or 6 rows of seating. That arena in the final shot goes way, 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 way up. It's like it's like your local baseball field versus Dodger Stadium or Yankee Stadium or Sky Dome or whatever.
Right. Nice. I have to ask, just if you can be vague about it, because I've been wanting to ask somebody who's seen it in person.
Hmm.
Does it look more? Because I watched it online.
Hmm.
Does the footage look more cinematic than your regular episode? Because I feel like it did when I was watching it, and that was the cruddy
Yeah.
version online. Um,
Yeah, definitely. Like there were some things that like again, that one take action sequence, could have felt very at home in season 1 or season 2. You think of the escape from Werner Herzog when he's taking Grogu back.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of got that kind of vibe where it is a small space action sequence. There are some scenes in the bar from season 3 in the New Republic bar, where Zeb and Carson Teva had their conversations and stuff. We do see Sigourney Weaver in there, chastising Din and Grogu for their exploits. So like there's some things that still feel like it's still the show. They haven't it's not like back in the day when you'd get like a Disney Channel show that they would then make into a movie and suddenly the sets were all different because they had a movie budget.
The glory of the Lizzie McGuire movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like that. It is still like the same sets, the same locations, but it feels like when Mando and Grogu are on their adventure, they are taking on bigger, more cinematic scale opponents. And instead of one TIE fighter chasing one Imperial troop transport and 2 speeder bikes or something, you'll get something that looks a little bit more like the Battle of Hoth in terms of the number of Imperials that they're going up against. So yeah, I did get that vibe. It felt like the show, if you took the show and turned it into a movie, which is what they're doing.
Awesome. Well, speaking of Disney Plus shows, as you probably know from Underworld, I am very excited for Ahsoka season 2 because I really enjoyed Ahsoka season 1. Although I do agree with you, Dominic, I think especially the last 2 episodes definitely kind of a little weak sauce. But I'm excited for season 2. I'm especially excited by the concept art, and especially because there was some concept art of a certain blue Grand Admiral in a command chair that reminded me of a certain trilogy from 1991. Okay, guys, we're here. Let's talk about it. The original sequels, the Thrawn Trilogy.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! All right. Let's just get into it. So I'm just gonna start with this. So, Dom, what's your overall relationship with both this book and just kind of the expanded universe as a whole? I'll just start with that. Why you decide to reread it?
Yeah.
So soon.
So I definitely read Heir to the Empire back in the day. Like not when it first came out. I wasn't born when it first came out, but like at some point when I was first like getting into Star Wars and getting into Star Wars books, I definitely read Heir to the Empire. I'm not sure if I read Dark Force Rising and The Last Command, because when I was reading those this time around, it was like, this is all new to me. Whereas there were parts of Heir to the Empire where I'm like, I remember this. I remember the Dagobah sequence and all that. I remember Luke drinking hot chocolate on Coruscant. I remember all that sort of stuff. So I know I read that one. I tried to dive into the expanded universe at a really difficult point, which was the Legacy of the Force series.
So near the end.
Near the end. I had read most of the Young Jedi Knights books as like a young reader, as like I read those books when I was like the prime audience for those books. So, late middle school, early high school, that kind of place. And I really enjoyed those. I really, really enjoyed those. I've still never read the last book in the series because I've never been able to find it.
They're hard to find, so don't worry.
Yeah. But I read the vast majority of them, so I was familiar with Jason and Jaina and Anakin Solo and Tenel Ka and characters like that. So I was familiar with the basics of that. Obviously, I knew about Luke, Han, and Leia, and I knew something of Mara Jade from having tried to read Thrawn Trilogy around the same time that I probably read those Young Jedi Knight books. And I tried to dive in with Legacy of the Force. Of course, Legacy of the Force takes place after the Yuzan Vong War. So like the whole galaxy has changed. Everything is different. It's like it's a whole new ball game, and there's so much catching up to do. And I spent so much time reading Wikipedia, just trying to like get into it. I still have never read the New Jedi Order. That's something I hope to do someday. But I read Legacy of the Force, and I started to get into some of the other expanded universe novels that were out at the time. This was, sort of 2009, 10, 11, sort of in that range. Fate of the Jedi was coming out, so I finished Legacy of the Force and went right into Fate of the Jedi. And read through that series, and with both of them there were elements that I really, really liked, and there were other places where I was just really lost and I didn't particularly care for some of what was going on. But and at the same time, like I said, I was trying to dive into other stuff. And so like I realized recently, like in the last like couple of years, that there were a lot of the like sort of quintessential Star Wars books that I had not read that were sort of the classics. And I was and because I was really unsure of how much of the Thrawn trilogy I'd read, I was like, maybe this is the place to start. These are the ones that kind of kickstarted everything. And so I read them, and they sort of put me on a kick of wanting to read like early expanded universe stuff that was before the prequels, before things before the universe started to be fleshed out in really expansive ways, when there was a real feeling of like anything is possible. And so I started with these ones. I've since moved on to Splinter of the Mind's Eye. I've been reading. I was reading that until Trials of the Jedi showed up, and I'm like literally on the last chapter of Splinter, and I put it down so I could read Trials of the Jedi just because I'm so excited for this one. Yeah,
I gotta ask though, how'd you feel about Luke thinking that Leia was pretty?
It's so funny to read. It's like genuinely. There's so many things about Splinter. This is we're gonna just turn this into a Splinter of the Mind's Eye conversation now. There's so many things about Splinter of the Mind's Eye where it's so clear that like you could just tell that all that existed was Star Wars 1977. And they didn't know that Luke and Leia were going to be brother and sister. And if you just watch Star Wars, you think Luke and Leia ultimately are going to get together. It seems like pretty clear that's where they go. And main guy character, main girl character, usually they wind up getting together. So it makes sense that in the sort of the sequel, you would start to get them closer together. And there's some scenes early on where they're like, they're trying to help each other, and suddenly their bodies are pressed up against each other and they can feel each other's warmth. And you're like, oh my God. And then there's other little things in Splinter, like Alan Dean Foster puts an apostrophe before the word droid every time, because before that, people didn't really say droid. They would say android. So Alan Dean Foster's clearly thinking that droid is meant to be some sort of shortening of android. So naturally, you would put the apostrophe there to shorten it, the same way, when you take the G out of a word that ends with ing, you put the apostrophe there. For some reason, the only word I can think of I won't say on this show, but it starts with F. Friggin. Instead of frigging, you'd say friggin. Put the apostrophe and things like that. And also Obi-Wan is spelled slightly differently. It's the W isn't capitalized, which now it's always capitalized. But so I'm loving these like early iterations of Star Wars. And so like I want to read the Brian Daley Han Solo books and the Lando Calrissian adventures and things like that, because
I got a recommendation for you, a big one. Tom Veitch's Tales of the Jedi. You gotta read those.
I have read those. I read them a long, long time ago, around the same time that I read Legacy of the Force. I was reading those because I have the like omnibus editions that Dark Horse published, where they're like in chronological order, which isn't release order. It's very Star Wars.
I know, right?
And so I'd like to revisit those as well at some point. I've read the original Dark Empire, but I never read Dark Empire 2 or Empire's End. So like go back to those things. But I've just been enjoying this sort of return to an era where the galaxy, like now, it's not that there isn't mystery and the galaxy doesn't feel wondrous and expansive, but like we do have a map,
Right.
We know where so much is. And to go to Ahsoka for a second, like one of the things that is really exciting about that show is the idea of opening up another galaxy. And the Peridia galaxy, does allow for some of that sort of wondrous feeling. Again, the High Republic has done a very good job of, inserting some of that wonder back into it with Planet X and the Nameless and the mystery around that, which is a big factor in Trials of the Jedi. I will say, without giving any spoilers, it's pretty that should be pretty obvious from the blurbs. But like, so things like that, they have done a good job. But there is something fun about, like, we don't know anything. We don't really know anything, and we're in the words of my long lost cousin Indiana, we're making it up as we go. And that, to an extent, that's what they're still doing now. There's just so much more previously established stuff, to the point where, like, Mimban is in Solo, and
Yeah, I know.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's great.
for that, I love that. That's like a deep cut that the Kasdans pulled. I think John Kasdan. I don't think Larry Kasdan could tell you what Splinter of the Mind's Eye is. But like, you know, things like that, like but in and this is the same thing in the Thrawn books. Like, there's so much out there. There's this idea that, like, a fleet could be missing for decades and generations and then be found, and things like that, that, you know, you wouldn't they wouldn't really try that today. That's not something that they would go for today. It just doesn't fit in with our current conception of what the galaxy is. But in 1991, they didn't know, so they did it, and it was awesome. So that's been my that's my long-winded explanation for my return to the roots of the expanded universe. Even as I'm, you know, at the same time reading, you know, something so current it technically isn't out yet.
Funny enough, you asked the answer. You must be reading my notes via my mind, because I'm actually going to ask you, like, how did you feel about all that about going back to the 90s? No, I 100% agree. I get on kicks of, like, loving reading prequel Star Wars.
Yeah.
And just kind of seeing, like, what did they think the Sith were? What did they think the rise
Clone
of
Wars.
the Clone Wars, the rise of Palpatine? How did they think of that? And, you know, it's like all these kind of contradicting kind of views. I love kind of seeing, like, which authors almost got it right and which ones kind of off the wall, off the mark, or like what the Jedi were. If you ever read, like, if you ever read Tom Veich's stuff, that's the Dark Empire.
Yeah.
Tale of the Jedi. Tom Veitch, he gets really close, and he had a lot of clairvoyance. Because I did a review of these books with a buddy of mine on this channel, part of our Legends Look Back. He had a lot of clairvoyance of what the prequels would almost be about in terms of the vibes and stuff like that. It's very Veitch is kind of one of the closer authors to Lucas, I felt. But I don't want to turn to a Tale of the Jedi discussion. We'll be here all day. But yeah, so kind of like you, I found Heir of the Empire in my local school library when I was a kid. I didn't understand back then this was actually a post-Endor story. I hadn't my conception of continuity and stuff like that didn't happen until way later, like 5. And then when I got into Star Wars, I was very much a Wikipedia kid. I just looked up and read all the entries of Wikipedia and kind of learned the timeline. Never read any of the books, but I learned the timeline of stuff. And then once I kind of really started digging deeper into it, the stuff, it's like I kind of went back to the Thrawn Trilogy. And that was definitely one of the books where it's like I really liked it. And like, you know, sometimes I just can't find books because they're just hard to find. Like, I've never read any of the New Jedi Order stuff. It's hard to find. It's a lot of it. But I've read the essentials. I've read Thrawn Trilogy. Definitely read Plagueis. That's definitely one of those essential books I think you should. Everyone needs to read at least once. I've been reading Tales of the Jedi. You know, all that good stuff. I'm actually hoping to get the Legacy comics for my birthday.
So good.
Yeah.
Genuinely so good. The whole run is excellent, but the first arc, you see why people got hooked on it. It's I reread some of those. I I used to work nights at a place, and it was basically sitting at my desk and there was not much to do, and I realized, hey, I think Comixology was still a thing at the time, and I was like, hey, I could just like go and buy a bunch of old comics on Comixology. And I was like, I remember reading Legacy back in the day, let's read it again. And like reading the first 6 issues again, just having my mind blown for a second time because I'd forgotten so much of it, but just remembering like how good it was.
I've also been rereading the Rogue Squadron comics and doing reviews on those. And when I was a kid, I had a big obsession with the Dark Empire comics. weirdly because of Harry Potter of all things.
Okay.
That's a little embarrassing when I bring up Harry Potter, but yeah. I used to just think, when I found out Palpatine came back, I'm like, oh my god, he's doing a Voldemort, and he has his Horcruxes. So that was my connection. Although Dark Empire happened first. Um,
Yeah.
but Thrawn Trilogy is one of those books I go back to almost yearly. It's one of the books where I remember a good chunk of it. I mean, sometimes
Mhm.
details slip my mind, but for the most part, I remember it. I know the story, remember a lot of the parts, and know the characters. And I think what I love about the Thrawn trilogy, I'll just give my overall thoughts on the book before we
Mhm.
get into the nitty gritty, and I'll ask you, is I think out of a lot of especially the post Endor stuff, which kind of goes wild in weird places, some fun, some just kind of not to my taste. This one to me captures pretty closely. There are a few things here and there that doesn't always hit, but captures to me kind of the spirit of the original trilogy in its tone, in its storytelling, in its style. It comes close to kind of capturing that kind of original trilogy-esque Star Warsiness, where
Mhm.
some of them kind of lean a little too much sci-fi. Some get really dark and depressing. Some get kind of almost like weirdly, they want to kind of subvert expectations and stuff like that. Especially like the later stuff, like the Legacy of the Force with the Darth Cadia stuff. What I always hear,
Mm.
it's very, very grim.
Oh
Um,
yeah, very grim.
but this book is very still Star Wars. That's kind of in its purest form. It's definitely got some new elements to it, and there's definitely a little bit of that sci-fi element because Tim's not a sci-fi writer. But it's definitely got that pure form with good characters, great story. And also, this is a trilogy. This is a true trilogy. I remember our trilogy episode that we did. This is what I think of when I think of a trilogy: a single story across
Mm.
3 stories that kind of all are one thing. Whereas like the other trilogy are kind of like both individual and telling an overarching story. It's kind of weird.
Mhm.
But this is very much a singular narrative. And of course, gotta love the impact. Like, I think this goes in the pantheon of Star Wars books that have left a mark on Star Wars for years to come, and maybe in a
Oh
way,
yeah.
I don't even think a lot of canon books have as well. Even like the good ones, like High Republic and stuff like that. Like everything
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
roots back to the Thrawn trilogy in some way, shape, and form.
I
And
mean, look at what's going
mm,
on screen now.
yeah, yeah.
It's in a sense, it's like an extremely loose adaptation of it.
Hmm.
That more characters from the Thrawn books have made their way into the current canon than anything else. And I mean, admittedly, it's Thrawn and Paleon, but like that's still two compared to
Yeah.
anything else. And Thrawn is resuming his role as like the guy, the key,
Yeah.
like the big bad for the current era of TV and movie storytelling now with the Mandoverse.
Agree. But Dominic, just what are your overall thoughts on the book before we get into the nitty gritty of it all? It's like what are your overall thoughts? I mean, you kind of gave it at the beginning, but we'll ask
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, like I said, I really liked it. I think you really hit on something there, that it captures the spirit of Star Wars. It captures the feeling of Star Wars.
Hmm.
Um, you get Zahn does a good job. He kind of introduces characters that feel sort of familiar, but they're a new take on them.
Hmm.
Talon Card, his storyline's not all that different from Han Solo's, and sort of like a
Hmm.
10,000-foot view kind of look at it, but it's different enough.
Hmm.
He's more of a boss in the underworld, whereas Han was kind of a lowly loser.
Hmm.
But they kind of go through this a similar journey, but it's familiar, but it's different. It doesn't feel like a repeat, but it's something else. Mara has kind of a Vader thing going on, where she is a dark sider. She wants to kill Luke, all this stuff. And over the course of the story, they kind of wind up having to work together. And yeah, there's a burgeoning romance there that makes far more sense than Splinter of the Mind's Eye
Oh yeah.
depiction of Luke and Leia. But again, it's not the same, because you get whole sequences in the books where they have to work together, even though they are still technically enemies. They have to work together. Thrawn is he's another emperor, but he's different. He
He's kind of like a Tarkin too, in some ways.
He doesn't use the Force,
Mhm.
but he's figured out a way to block it. And
Right.
that's something that I think is underappreciated in a lot of Star Wars books is you need to find a way for your villain to neutralize the Jedi, and it can't just be that they're really smart. Like that's part of it, and that is part of the appeal of Thrawn is that he is really smart. Although
Mhm.
I have this problem in the stuff on screen, and I had the same issue in the books where a lot of time like he loses and he goes, "Ha ha ha! All part of my plan." It's like, no, you just lost, buddy. Come on. Um, but he's smart, but he has a way to combat the Jedi where you neutralize their powers. That's the Yuzon Vong again do have an iteration of this, and in the High Republic, Markion Ro has this with the Nameless, where they have a way to make it so that the Jedi cannot just automatically win without resorting to it being a Sith, a Dark Jedi, Knight of Ren or whatever, So
Right.
it's or Inquisitor, any of that stuff. Like that sort of is what makes it work. So he takes these archetypes, he puts a new spin on it, Zahn that is, and then he puts the characters in new situations. So yeah, what if Luke and Vader had to work together for a movie? Well, we never got to see that, but we get to see Luke and Mara have to work together. And it's not the same. It's not the same, but it gives you a kind of a sense of what that might be because we understand where Mara is coming from. We understand the archetype that she's fulfilling. And by putting that archetype with our Luke archetype, we then get to explore something new and interesting. So Zahn did a really, really, really good job, better than most at finding these characters, finding iterations of these archetypes to make it familiar but fresh. And I think that's part of the reason why these books continue to resonate. I think people were hungry and ready for new Star Wars, and if you'd just gotten a pretty good Star Wars story, you probably still get a lot of the publishing we see today. I think even a pretty good book would have just gotten the ball rolling, and maybe wouldn't quite have quite as much, but it would still have books. This book though has the lasting legacy because it is that good. Everybody still talks about it. Everybody still remembers it. The storytellers now are lifting from it, lifting characters and situations from it and putting it in their stories and then putting their own spin on it, which is exciting. And that's the sort of legacy that all Star Wars stories should strive to have, but few succeed because it's really freaking hard.
No,
Really freaking hard.
I agree. I mean, a lot of the post-Endor books, you could argue, are okay. They're fun. Some aren't very well written. I know people have their problem with Kim and J. Anderson stuff. Although I always heard good. I mean, again, I always heard good things about
Young
them.
Jedi Knights.
Yeah,
Young Jedi Knights. Kevin and his
the
wife.
Jedi Academy trilogy, though. I've always
Yeah.
heard. But Young Jedi Knights, yeah.
Are they married? Is
Um,
Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Moesta married? I don't know. Maybe they aren't. I shouldn't say that.
I don't know. I don't know either. Yeah, I mean, I agree. This is a trilogy that deserves
They are
the
married.
hype.
They are married. Just to
Okay.
confirm, they are married.
Okay, they are fair. Oh, also, hey, that's what that background looks like. Also, hi Daisy. But no, this is a book trilogy that deserves the hype. I agree. I mean, I myself might think something like Plagueis or Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith novelization.
Mm.
I find more interesting. I've always do a lot of deep dives on. But no, I 100% agree. These books stand the test of time. They also stand the test of time in a way I think other Star Wars books don't, especially of this time period. And sometimes that's fun. Again, like there are things about 90s Star Wars that is like, oh, that's very 90s. It's like with Splinter of the Mind's Eye. You're probably reading this as like, oh, this is very 70s and this is very. But
oh yeah.
But
so many. So many ways.
But it can be fun and kind of, but you got to put your mind back into that sort of mindset. With this, I don't feel like I always have to put my mind back in a 90s mindset always. I feel like I can still have my 2025 mindset of Star Wars and read these books and be pretty okay with it. Which is again, why I think a lot of people, probably like even Dave Filoni, these were the sequels of the time, right? Um, so I want to get into that a little bit as well, because I have a bit of a controversial hot take about these are the sequel trilogy books. I
Okay.
think this is my take. I think in a prequel world, I totally get that, right? Because before the
Mm.
prequels, Star Wars is the adventures of Luke Skywalker. It's Luke, Han, and Leia. Yeah, that's what you want. You want their continuing adventures. That's what everybody wanted 7, 8, 9 to be. I think in a post prequel world, regardless of how you feel about the sequels we have right now, I think that the Thrawn trilogy as a sequel trilogy does not completely work, only because I see the trilogies as generational things. And again, regardless of how you feel about the current sequel trilogy that we have, I think it was, and things like could have been more original and that stuff. I think that the key is, still they created a new generation for that trilogy in Rey, Finn, Rose, Poe. While this book, Thrawn trilogy, I think are great. The continuing adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia, and the building of the New Republic. As a sequel trilogy in a post prequel world, let's not even get into stuff like with kind of the Anakin of it all. Not what I would necessarily want, regardless of how I feel about the current sequels that we have. That's my kind of hot take on the matter.
Yeah,
So
I agree. I agree. I think I've always felt that the Thrawn trilogy works best as the in-between story. The in-between story between the two trilogies. And that's kind of what we're gonna get with the Mandoverse movie in a couple years.
right.
It's a big important story, but it is not the next installment in the Skywalker saga. It's not episode 7.
Right.
And I felt that way. I've always felt that way. I felt that looking at the Legends continuity, that the New Jedi Order and the Yuzhan Vong storyline was much more of the sort of true sequel trilogy, even though it's 22 books, the true like sequel trilogy vibe of the story, because like you said, it is generational. It's the next generation, and it's also a new threat. And this was always my issue with the idea that these should be the the official sequel trilogy, is that I don't think the remnant of the Empire, I don't think the leftovers from the previous villain is big enough to be the villain for the next like trilogy. It can be a great threat for the in between, as these books demonstrate, as the Mandoverse is exploring. I'm not saying it can't work, but the next threat needs to be something else. Now, in the sequels we have, JJ kind of got around that, where he wanted to have the Empire and he called it the First Order and he made it kind of this new thing. And that works for me. I will admit, I think that was, he did enough to make it a separate thing, not just like, hey, these are the leftovers of the Empire. And that's why I think it serves best as the in between continuing adventure, the story you didn't know, and we're gonna see that, I think, in a few years with the movie, and we've already read an iteration of that, a very 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 good iteration of that in these books.
I agree. I agree. So if you're listening, Kinberg, yeah, if you're doing 10, 11, 12, you probably are, but you're not going to tell us.
Yeah.
You can't use the Empire. They call them the Yuzon Kwong or something, or the something. I don't know.
I've said this before. I hope Simon. I what I want the next like trilogy to be is to be like, go like way into the future and restore some of that like anything can happen, we don't know the galaxy feeling that we were just talking about. That's so fun in the 90s and 80s and 70s era Star Wars books.
Read Legacy, but make it 1,000 years just to give us some space.
Yeah, exactly, and make that 10, 11, 12. And you'll make it 700 years in the future, and then you can still have Grogu in there. He can be kind of like Yoda.
The galaxy's ruled by the great grandson of Cell. I'm kidding. No, I 100% agree, and I think that's such a great take. But that gets us into kind of, I want to get into the world building and the plot.
Mm.
Um, I'm not going to compare everything to the sequel trilogy that we have, I promise. But I think again, one reason why people really love this is such a natural continuation of Return of the Jedi, right?
Mhm.
It's not just it's Rebels and Empire again. They would try that with Dark Empire. I mean, I love Dark Empire, so. But this is very much a natural continuation of the events of Return of the Jedi. It's 5 years, so the characters they're more mature, but they're not completely different. Again, I'm not gonna compare everything to the sequels, I promise. But Luke is very much he's kind of had his arc. He kind of gotten over a little bit of his cockiness a little bit. And everyone's kind of where you suspect. The rebels are building the New Republic. This is the first time where we hear the words New Republic, by the way. Another thing where the Thrawn Trilogy has very much been the core of a lot of post Endor stuff. We see the Imperial Remnant. I have some actually interesting thoughts on the Imperial Remnant that I'll get into a little bit. And just it's kind of everyone is exactly where you'd think they'd be. Which is again, I think it's what a lot of people wanted, both back then and kind of now. Again,
Mhm.
I don't think it would have worked because you still, regardless of how you feel, you're gonna age up Luke and Leia to get Harrison, Mark and Carrie back,
Mhm.
unless of course George was gonna do the deep fake de-agey thing, which is coming. It's we all know it's coming. But things would probably be a little bit more different. One could hope. Um, but no, I've always loved the world building of the story. It's and again, it laid the foundation for a lot of the post Endor stuff. Like you talk about the New Jedi Order and Legacy and the Force stuff and
Mhm.
all the stuff that goes all the way to Darth Cassius. It's like all that stuff
Kindness, yeah.
all set here in this trilogy, which is funny because they never planned it. That's another amazing thing about this trilogy and what they were able to accomplish with the old EU is like this wasn't planned. This wasn't a grand 30-year strategy. It was just, hey Tim, tell some books. Like, hey Kevin,
Yeah.
tell some books. Build off of this stuff.
It's like
Okay.
a it's like a 1-year strategy followed by a 1-year strategy followed by a 3-year strategy followed by a 1-year strategy followed by a 5-year strategy. Like
Pretty
that's kind of
much. But you gotta admit, it's pretty astonishing what they accomplished.
Oh yeah,
In
it's wild. Like, and that's why trying to jump in with Legacy of the Force was insane because
mhm.
so much had happened and you could if you had jumped on like at the beginning or at any point probably um up until the Yuzon Vong invasion, like you could have followed along with this very like expansive and
Mhm.
sprawling story with a lot of characters, a lot of them familiar. Obviously the big movie characters, but also some of the secondary characters from the movies, like Wedge and the Rogue Squadron crew, but also a whole cadre of new characters
Mhm.
that suddenly you're reading Legacy of the Force and you're getting POV chapters from people who, if you've only seen the movie, you've never heard of these people, but if you read these books, you're keeping up with it. And that is the great thing about it and also the worst thing about it, because it made it really difficult to get excited about what was current. There was that feeling of there's a lot of homework that needs to be done if you want to get involved and get excited in the whatever was going on with Fate of the Jedi or whatever. What was the last one called? The one that was
Crucible,
after
I think it was
Crucible.
called.
Yeah, the last Troy Denning book. Yeah. If you wanted to be like in on the excitement of that, like you either gotta commit to just like Wikipedia-ing every other character, uh, and even the characters you're kind of
Mhm.
Wikipedia-ing them, or commit to reading like at least the highlights of several decades worth of books.
Oh yeah, post Endor almost became impenetrable.
Yeah.
That's why by then I was just like, I'm just gonna read Plagueis and Kenobi.
Yeah.
Easy to read.
That's
Even
that's why Del Rey and Dark Horse to an extent at the time started doing books like Kenobi and Plagueis, and the Star Wars Empire and Rebellion, Honor Amongst Thieves, things like that. Swear Hat, the best acronym for a Star Wars book ever. Like things like that, where they would do like the Empire and Rebellion series, where you could have these sort of standalone adventures with the characters, and just enjoy a Star Wars novel that way without needing to know everything the way you needed
Right.
to for Crucible or Fate of the Jedi, or any of those books.
Then they rebooted, and it's like outside of High Republic, most things are pretty standalone.
Yeah.
But Dominic, what are your thoughts on just the overall world building and kind of the
Yeah.
plot of the story?
Well, like you said, like what would you, if you're just putting yourselves in the shoes of somebody who all you have is the original trilogy, what do you want to see next? Well, you want to see Luke trained to become a Jedi Master. You want to see how that happens. You want to see, Han and Leia, presumably Leia become a Jedi Master. You want to see, do Han and Leia start a family? Do they, have the next generation? Can they, sustain this new republic that they've built? These are all the interesting questions. And, at the end of the Empire of Dreams documentary, Mark Hamill even sort of vocalizes this. He's like, what about all the other adventures that Luke could have? And this book is kind of, or these books are kind of, fulfilling that promise. We are seeing Luke struggling with the idea of, what does it mean to be the last of the Jedi or the first of the Jedi, depending on your point of view. And that gives you, something, something special to hang on to, something, really interesting in. And it's something that, we're still interested in, we're still wondering about with the current canon, right? Like there's only a handful of books and stories about these characters post Return of the Jedi, in the interim between Jedi and Force Awakens. And as you guys talked about, there was the weirdness with the comics, where it looked like the comics were going to finally get into it, and then they kind of got shuttered. A couple, what was meant to be an ongoing series became 2 miniseries, so like that those questions still remain. They are interesting. And anytime we do get to see Luke, the handful of times we have seen him, be it in the Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, or even the Battlefront,
Oh yeah, I love that.
Battlefront as cameo in there, we do kind of cling to those moments because we're wondering, what does it take for him to go from, defeating the Emperor and Darth Vader to then starting this Jedi Academy, and then ultimately we know it all comes crashing down later.
Agreed. I mentioned the plot of this book as well. I really like how this book's plotted. It's just, it's like, I think this is one of the most, like, I remember somebody else doing a Thrawn Trilogy review, some guy like, this is the most consistent Star Wars trilogy probably ever. And I mean ever. I'm even talking about the ones we have now, because everything that's set up has a payoff, and a payoff in a way you expect, right? Like the original trilogy, it's like, oh, Luke and Leia are now brother and sister. Oh my,
Yeah.
right? Sequel trilogy, it's like, oh, here's Palpatine again. Prequels are kind of very standalone, and it's like, it's like, we kind of have to reset with Attack of the Clones, and then no more Dooku, and now it's Anakin and Obi-Wan, that sort of thing. Here, it's Thrawn's doing something. He's got this big grand strategy. You gotta get Mount Tantus, get the fleet, get the clones, get the mad clone, and Luke and Leia kind of have to stop him. And there's also some, there's a B plot with like the government stuff with Boris Falia and Akbar, and there's the Mara Jade stuff, and Mara Jade's kind of dealing with her psychological thing with the Emperor, and it all culminates. And it is really kind of, that's another thing about this book. It's like it's a singular story, and everything pays off so nice. Like it's the same villain, the plots throughout the whole thing. There's no like plot gets dropped, characters kind of go away. You have a villain for one, then he goes away. Palpatine comes back in the third. All that sort of stuff. It's a very well put together story. But what did you think of, like, when you were reading just the whole trilogy together, like the plot and how everything kind of moved?
I mean, this is, ultimately, it's what you get when you have someone who has a sort of an open-ended. They don't have to reach a certain point at the ending. They're allowed to completely make up the story on their own from beginning to end and tell it, like be one person telling it. Like you went through the sort of the wonkiness of all the other trilogies. The original trilogy, that wasn't supposed to be a trilogy. It was supposed to be a lot more movies. And then George went, you know what? I'm sick of making movies. My life is falling apart. I got to quit and raise my children. So it's a trilogy now. We're ending here with the third one. The prequels, there is a predefined ending that you have to get to, and whatever interesting ideas you may have for along the way, ultimately you know what the ending has to be. So those ideas are wind up being a little bit limited, and they kind of wind up being a little bit square peg in a round hole in some places. Sequel trilogy, of course, you have the idea of doing 3 different directors, 3 different visions to tell this story, and then ultimately go with 2 different directors, 2 different visions that wind up working really, really well in some places and clashing in other places. Here you have Zahn. He does not have to hit something specific at the ending. Anakin does not have to turn into Darth Vader at the end of the story. He gets to figure out what he wants the ending to be, and he gets to figure out how you get from point A to point Z and points B, C, D, E, all the way through W, X, Y, throughout those 3 books. He gets to figure out that entire thing himself. And yeah, the proof is in the pudding of how successful that can be, because you wind up with something that is it's consistent throughout. And if you ever listen to Zahn talk about writing this book, right, like he took writing this trilogy very, very, very seriously,
Right.
in a way that, just because I think of like the realities of writing the books, nobody is able to do it quite the same way that he did, because it was the first. So it had to be perfect. It had to be perfect. And so there, he would drive around and listen to the movies just to try and get the rhythm of the movies, the rhythm of the voices. And, he plotted this thing out so that you would hit those highs and lows of that we expect in a Star Wars story, from what we had seen in the original trilogy, at least. And like I said, the proof is in the pudding. It flows beautifully from one book to the next.
Agreed. I want to talk about just a couple plot points before we get into characters and stuff, because there are certain things I definitely want to hit on. So the thing about this era of Star Wars books is that it's interesting that they really wanted these books to kind of both be standalone. Standalone. I don't know why I'm using those words. Standalone-ish in terms of there's not a lot of massive status quo changes. Compared to with the Yuzong Long, where it's like the galaxy just gets wrecked. After that, there are definitely things that do change. Luke does establish the Jedi Academy trilogy, that sort of thing. But for the most part, they try to keep it here's an Imperial warlord. Now we must defeat Imperial warlord, and then galaxy back to normal. I have a lot of the later Thrawn Trilogy stuff. But obviously these books do have some 2 big status quo changes. Obviously, Lega's birth to Jason Jaina. But here's actually one that I'm actually kind of curious to get your take on. What did you make of, at the beginning of Heir of the Empire, Obi-Wan Kenobi basically going, "Well, Luke, I can't be a Force Ghost anymore. You did your job. Vader and the Emperor are dead. They're probably going to be more evil, but I got to go to Force Heaven. So bye-bye, Luke." What do you make of that? I'm always curious about that part, because this is definitely one of those things where people are trying to figure out what a Force Ghost is.
Yeah, there's that element of can Force Ghosts stick around forever, or do they have to move on at a certain point? Ultimately, in the story, the purpose that serves is Luke can't have someone that he's relying on. He can't have mentor figures around. The reason the mentor always gets killed off in these stories is because the hero has to advance beyond them. And Lucas came up with sort of this little cheat where he could do that, but also have the mentor come back from time to time to dispense a little bit more wisdom when you might need to. You might need it, and in a story that doesn't have ghosts, that you could do that by having them find some writings of the mentor, or they left them a video message on a cassette tape or something. There's other ways to do it, but George's way was to have Force Ghosts. In this story, Luke needs a reason to want to seek out Joris Sabaoth or whatever, however
I
his
call
name
him
is pronounced.
Sabaoth. I think it's Sabaoth.
Sabaoth. He needs a reason to seek this guy out. And if he can still talk to Obi-Wan whenever he wants, if Obi-Wan can guide him through, what it takes to become not just a Jedi Knight, but a Jedi Master, then he's not going to be intrigued by this other guy who's out there. So just practically from a storytelling point, Zahn needs to take that character off the board in order for Luke to be motivated to seek out Joris for this story to take place and for that whole plot to work. You can't have Obi-Wan, you can't have Yoda, you can't have Anakin there constantly reaching out to Luke going, no, don't listen to this freaking guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's crazy, he's a mad clone, get away from him. They have to be off the board. So this is me maybe looking at things maybe from a more of a practical writing standpoint than a in-universe kind of thing. But I look at that and go, all right, yeah, of course. No, Obi-Wan can't be around. He can't be there to guide Luke forever. So
it's one of those interesting things where it works for the story, but there are definitely some interesting long-term consequences if Star Wars is to be forever. Which is kind of interesting in terms of like how Force ghosts work and like, well, what does that mean for everybody else? For the other authors, I guess, back then they weren't thinking that far ahead, where now it's like, even authors who I think get a lot of leeway, like Charles Soule, it's like, you still got to think about the other authors who want to play with the toys or make new toys.
But that's the thing. If you want to take Obi-Wan off the board, it makes it so somebody can't do a Force Ghost Obi-Wan down the line. But then they just got to come up with something else. Like if they want to have a scene with Obi-Wan, well, that's on you to figure out how the hell that happens. And that's how we wind up with things like Mortis, the World Between Worlds. In Fate of the Jedi, they descend into some like, I feel like it's a lake or something, and there's all these like dead characters that are there, and they can talk to Anakin Solo and Mara Jade,
like
and I think
of knowledge or power.
Yeah,
it's an Abeloth thing.
Yeah, and so like they have a conversation with Anakin Solo, and they have one with Mara Jade, and I think is Obi-Wan in there, or was that just something Denning cut? It might have been something Denning cut. I can't.
I actually never read those books, so I wouldn't have no
idea.
Because
I can't because I know there was somebody that Denning was going to have Obi-Wan or have Luke meet, and it was going to either be Obi-Wan or Anakin, and ultimately they wound up being cut. So I think that's probably what I'm thinking of. But like they find other ways to do it. There are workarounds from it, while still maintaining the integrity of this story from a craft standpoint.
Right. I agree with that. Obviously, another big world building thing I like, of course, is again, which is something, I think it's something a lot of people want in the sequel trilogy too, is the reverse dynamic. The Empire is now the rebellion. The rebellion is now the government. I love that kind of power imbalance, and I think that's another thing that made Thrawn such a compelling villain. Is he has to work with so little. Which is weirdly why, back in the day when Thrawn got introduced in Rebels, I was so worried he was going to die in Rebels. Because as much as I like Thrawn in Rebels, and I do always say Thrawn in Rebels is like the best version of a TV Y7 adaptation of Thrawn. And I do believe that. Thrawn, I think what makes Thrawn cool is, he has to work with limited resources. He can't, if he got the limitless resource of the Empire and Rebels, it's like, oh, I mean, that's fun. And I think Thrawn's really good, but like, he's still got the limited resource of the Empire. What made Thrawn so cool is like, he's got just a couple Star Destroyers and, he got to build up his empire again. Heck, it seems like in Ahsoka, he doesn't even have a few Star Destroyers. He just got the one.
Got the one, yeah.
Got the one. It's like they've even reduced his forces down to one Star Destroyer, and it's like all his troopers are like a cult. The cult of Thrawn are in there.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciate as well. And we'll get into things like Kashyyyk and the Nogri as we go through along. So let's get to the characters. Let's not talk about the Big Blue just yet. Let's talk about his second in command, his Watson, his assistant.
Yeah.
Talk about good old Captain Pelion. Pelion's such a good point of view character, I think.
Yeah.
For the beginning of for both the Imperial perspective and the beginning of the book, because I really think it highlights it really highlights just the state of the empire at the time. Like, the ships are being manned by conscripts. Pelion's thinking about the destruction of Endor, what happened, the loss of the Executor. Which by the way, another thing Tim Zahn does, which I love, is he recontextualizes both Yavin and Endor, and how that just led to the fracturing of the Empire, where Yavin was not just the loss of the Death Star, but the loss of the veteran senior commanders and leaders of the Empire. You lost some of the idea has always been, now you lose Tarkin, you lose Clone Wars veteran officers. Like, these are people with institutional experience. And then at Endor, when you use the Executor, you lose some of the best and brightest who could have risen to the chain of command really quickly. So the Empire's really lost a lot of its brain trust outside of the Emperor and Vader, obviously. And here comes Thrawn to kind of rebuild the pieces. And I really do like watching Pelion's perspective of, he's not really sure what's going to happen with the Empire, to, oh, this Thrawn guy is going to be he's the one, he's the dude who's going to do it. The new Empire is here. And what I really also love is the parallel between Endor, where we find out Pelion was the one who ordered the retreat at Endor. If you wonder why a captain ordered the retreat of the fleet at Endor, there's a very weird chain of command thing where it's this, with Piet dead, the order should have gone to this guy, but that he died, so that this guy died. So kind of through happenstance, it all came down to Pelion, and that's when Pelion just made the call of we gotta get out of here, guys. And then again, at the end of the story, Pelion once again, with Thrawn dead, he has to make the call of, game over, guys, we gotta run. And just, ooh, you could feel he's in pain when he has to do that. But yeah, what'd you make of Pelion as our officer?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said he's Watson, right? if Thrawn is evil Sherlock Holmes, you need someone there. We can't fathom what's going on inside his brain. We can't go into his mind palace. It doesn't make sense to us. He's operating on a whole other plane. So you need someone there who can kind of speak for us and go, holy crow, he figured it out. I can't believe it. It was all part of the plan. And yeah, he represents kind of the everyman in the Empire, where, he's not necessarily, supremely evil the way Tarkin and Vader and the Emperor are, but he is loyal to that regime, and he believes in it. So you get kind of a different perspective. The Empire in this book, they're crueler, or they're just as cruel in their tactics against their enemies, but they're far less cruel to each other. Joris kind of has that a little bit, but Thrawn and Pelion, they aren't Vader and the Emperor. Vader, it becomes the running bit in Empire Strikes Back. Somebody pisses off Vader, Force choke, dead. It becomes a whole thing. And that just doesn't happen with Thrawn. And it's neat to have Pelion there, again, kind of speaking for the audience and commenting on, oh, well, yeah, Vader was here. That wouldn't have flown. He would have been dead. He wouldn't have been understanding that the guy did his best, but didn't have the technology or could learn from this. Vader was just like, oh, you have failed me for the last time, Commander. Whereas Thrawn's like, you could learn from this. You could learn from this. I'll leave you alive because you ain't gonna make that mistake again.
I think you've hit that's such a great point of the idea of they're cruel to their enemy, but not cruel to each other. Because unfortunately, in this, I don't know if you have how much you know about fan discourse. One of the unfortunate side effects of the kind of the post Endor era legend stuff and Thrawn is this kind of, and this is more from fans, although some authors may have stepped into this a little bit, is kind of a bit of a whitewashing of the Empire, where especially fans, this is more fans than the books themselves, kind of have this notion of oh, the Empire is fine. Just get rid of Palpatine and Vader. Get rid of all the crazy Darksiders, and you can have a good Empire, right? Just honorable military officers. And I think that's such a great point of No, the Empire under Thrawn is still cruel to its enemies. I mean, Thrawn does
Mhm.
threaten to destroy a city at Wayland, for shooting at him with an arrow.
Yeah.
You
And all
know,
the stuff he does to the Nogri throughout
oh
the story is, yeah, it's
yeah,
vile.
but again, I guess that one guy at the beginning of Heir of the Empire who made the mistake and he chopped
Mhm.
off his head. Thrawn's not force choking everybody or cackling evilly like the Emperor. But I think that's also just a survival thing. It's like, well, they're limited on resources. We can't really be backstabbing each other.
Yeah, I can't go around killing everybody.
Right.
We'll run out of men real quick. If Vader was still alive, yeah, he would have done more to take out the Empire than the rebels if Vader was the only one left.
That's
Yeah.
true. So I think that's such a great point. It gives the Empire, it humanizes them, but doesn't absolve them of their sins. Uh,
Yeah, and that's something, it's something we grapple with our own history of, like, when we look at, evil regimes. Yeah, the guys at the top are really, really bad, and the people that were just following orders, that's not great, but, like, it's not the same. It's not like it's bad, and then there are the people that were just kind of there, and, like, how do we deal with that? And it presents an interesting question, but ultimately the thing that is important to remember in all of this is that the end result is a real bad thing, and that can't be
mm-mm.
overlooked, even if you can perhaps, to some characters in the Empire, take a sympathetic eye or have a sympathetic ear. Um, we see that a little bit in the Mandalorian, and the best episode of season 3, where
Yeah.
we see the process, the, like, rehabilitation process. And, was every single person on that Star Destroyer a maniacal killer? No, but they contributed to it. So how do you just execute them all? And if you do that, are you really any better than the Empire? Or do you give them the opportunity to prove themselves? And that's what the New Republic is trying to do in our current canon, at least.
No,
But
I
and again, just to get into, like, the idea of, like, the noble empire, like, you see where that comes from, but you can't forget that all of this was about building, planet destroying super weapons. That the one like fan theory, or I don't even know if it maybe even got a little bit leaked into canon a little bit, or Legends canon a little bit, that I just cannot go with, is the idea that Palpatine was building the Death Star to deal with the Yuuzhan Vong. I'm
uh,
sorry. That is a complete misread of the character. That is complete misread of the character.
oh
Could
yeah.
the Death Star have been used against the Usopp? Sure. Yeah. If Palpatine sticks around in power, he could have used it against them, maybe. But that is not what he was doing in building the either Death Star, and the current canon with Andor and Rogue One and Rebels and Catalyst and all of those other books, and stories that tell the quote unquote real version of
But
the story, are much truer to the intent that is evident in the original trilogy and evident in everything George has said about what Palpatine was doing with that, with the Death Star, or is just I mean, Tarkin says it himself in A New Hope. Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station. It's about oppression. It is not about protection from the Yuuzhan Vong.
don't
Rant over. Rant
don't
from 2007 over.
don't you know that the Exegol planet destroying fleet was to prevent the Yuzong Vong from invading? Don't That's what the Exegol and the clones were all for? Duh.
Of course. Of
Of
course.
course, of course. No, you're absolutely correct, and I've always hated that too. And you're right, because it does seep in. Some authors, I think, get a little too mixed into that stuff
Yeah.
than others. This book does not. I think this book is actually pretty clear
No, no,
on
no, no.
on who's the villain here.
Yeah, no,
Um,
no. Zahn, for as much as he clearly loves writing Thrawn, he
yeah.
does not shy away from the fact that he is evil at the end of the day. He is
Oh,
evil.
absolutely. And let's get into him because I think this is probably the most villainous Thrawn is in any trilogy. I've read some of the later stuff. Thrawn kind of gets a little bit more of an anti-hero
Mhm.
vibe in some of Zahn's later works, and there's been an accusation, well, not an accusation, that sounds like I'm accusing him. There's been critiques, that's a better word, of Zahn maybe falling in love a little too much with the character and kind of forgetting he was ultimately the villain. And there's always a divide between Filoni Thrawn and Tim Zahn Thrawn. And I think, I definitely think Filoni Thrawn is more based off of the original iteration of the Heir to the Empire stuff. He's definitely a lot more villainous. He's a lot more, crueler in some aspects, a little bit more harsh. Maybe not to his soldiers, but definitely to like his enemies. And, you're right. Thrawn is an interest. I think, but you gotta give it to Tim Zahn. He made a character so powerful that it stuck with us to this day. Like, I remember when Star Wars rebooted back in 2015. I think we all knew it was going to happen. I felt a little sad too, but we all kind of knew it. But there was an emptiness, at least for me. I mean, maybe not everybody has this if you're not connected to the legend stuff, but at least to me, there was an emptiness of like, oh, Thrawn's not canon anymore. Star Wars feels almost empty. This feels weird. And I had to tell myself that they weren't going to do Thrawn in the sequel trilogy. Regardless of how I felt, like I had to convince myself hard that Snoke was not a code name for Thrawn. Back in the day, it was wild. But then when Thrawn came back in Rebels, I almost felt like Star Wars has been made whole again. I mean, I know everyone doesn't have this, but for me at least, that's how powerful that character was. Where it's like Thrawn not being there just felt unnatural to the universe. It's like he made a character. It's like, no, this character needs to be here. In a way, like not all the other characters do. Like, Mara Jade, I love Mara Jade too, but like I didn't feel like Mara Jade needs to be here. I mean, if she comes back, great. Or Yuzon Vong, like I don't need Yuzon Vong to come back, or Revan, I don't need him to come back, although he is back. Keep name drop. It's like this Thrawn. It's like, no, something's wrong. This doesn't feel right. And then when Thrawn came back, it's like, oh no, it feels right again. So something has been returned to me. And that's just the power of this character. Because you're right, making a villain after the Emperor and Vader, I think is hard. I think it really is. Even Dark Empire couldn't do it. They just brought back the Empire, the Emperor. The sequel trilogy themselves get a Vader Emperor Redux, and just the Emperor himself.
I can't hear you, Joel. You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, you're back. We got you. You're with.
Testing.
Oh no, now you're. Oh,
testing,
no.
1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh.
Yes, I can.
Here.
Technical difficulties, folks. This is what happens. This is live broadcasting for you. Sometimes you get so passionate, you knock the microphone out of its jack. See Joel here. He's plugging it back in. I'm just going to do live play-by-play commentary. Yeah, we can hear you now, buddy. We can hear you now.
Okay. You can hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello. Okay, phew. Okay, good. Testing. Hello.
We got you.
Okay, good. What I was saying was, I love Kylo Ren. He became more than a Vader Redux. I still think he could do something interesting with Snoke, but yeah, he's an Emperor Redux and an Emperor clone. But with Thrawn, he's such a unique character. He is Tarkin and the Emperor and Officer kind of all mixed together, and they made him blue, and they gave him this art thing, and that's just such a powerful character. And now they're doing this, his canon Heir of the Empire, essentially. It makes Star Wars, at least for me, made Star Wars feel whole. And that's something that a lot of Star Wars characters don't have. Like, I could live without other Star Wars Legends characters popping up, but Thrawn was so different. And I mean, and that's just how much I love that character. But what about you, Dominic? What was it like reading the original Thrawn appearance for the first time?
It was great. Like, so I was at Star Wars Celebration in London in 2016 when they announced that Thrawn was coming back. I remember Dave Filoni being on stage with Tia Sircar and Sam Witwer, and Filoni, getting, and Warwick Davis was hosting, and they're getting ready to tee up the trailer, and Filoni goes, yeah, let's see if we can expand the universe a little bit. And everybody goes, oh, because we all know what's coming, right? And the trailer happens, and there's this huge ovation. There's a huge standing ovation. And if you go back and watch the live stream, you can actually see me in the ovation. Like they cut to the crowd, and they cut back to the stage, and they cut to the crowd again, and they cut back to the stage, and they cut back to the crowd. I think I've been like the third cut back to the crowd. You can see me and my buddy Rob Gower standing there, applauding the moment, because even only having a limited knowledge of Thrawn, you understood the importance of this character. And like you said, there's only a handful of Legends characters that carry that weight. You mentioned, Mara, Revan, characters like that would be so momentous. But Thrawn has always felt like the one that was the easiest to reincorporate into the story, and in a way the most important to bring back into the story, because he represented something so different, and he was really necessary in Rebels to shake things up. Because season 1, they did a really good job of having a wide variety of villains who presented different challenges, but also moving off of those villains once it was clear that our heroes could defeat them. Oresco and Grint get the at a certain point, because they aren't effective villains against our heroes anymore. Whereas the Grand Inquisitor and Agent Callus, they stick around and until the Grand Inquisitor doesn't. And not to turn this into a Rebels conversation, but in season 2 of Rebels, I always felt that it was a weaker season, in part because the threats that felt so present in season 1 were there. We had defeated the Grand Inquisitor, so having 2 of his underlings show up didn't feel like an appropriate threat. Callus still was a good threat and a good character, but he was going through an evolution towards becoming a hero. And there were no other Imperial officers. There was Admiral Brontis, or as I like to call him, Admiral Blandis, who kind of recurred through the season. And again, there just wasn't really anything there. And so Thrawn shows, kind of the things that were kind of sustaining that season were, the Jedi training and the Ahsoka subplot, and ultimately knowing that Vader was going to show up. And then, of course, Maul shows up as well to really inject a little bit more urgency into the affairs. But into season 3, Thrawn comes, and all of a sudden the threats to our heroes feel real and feel sustained again, and that's what this character has always brought, and in a way that's what he does in this story, because there shouldn't be any more threats out there. They beat the best ones. You got rid of Tarkin in episode 4. You get rid of Vader and the Emperor in episode 6. There's nobody else out there who should be. All of these Imperial officers are a bunch of Admiral Blandises. They're just guys out there who are just holding on to power, holding on by the skin of their teeth. And Thrawn comes in and becomes that genuine threat that the New Republic, in this case, or the Rebel Alliance on Rebels, has to actually take seriously. They can't underestimate this guy, because he will make them pay.
Oh, absolutely. And Thrawn also is very much the archetype for the Imperial warlord, which a lot of post-ender stuff will go into. No, they got Warlord Zinj. I actually don't know what Warlord Zinj is like. We got Admiral Dala. Well, she's a little interesting too. And Pelion kind of becomes the warlord of his own right. But no, I mean, that moment in Rebels and the moment in Ahsoka episode 6.
Yeah. Just
one of my favorite moments. For me, Ahsoka, my favorite episodes are 4, 5, 6, where just you hear Thrawn. His theme play, the organ pipe,
Thrawn's. Sorry, continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. You were getting in the zone. You're getting in a vibe. I shouldn't have cut you off.
Thrawn. And then, Lars Mikkelsen in the makeup. You hear the voice. It's from Rebels, so you got it familiar. Look perfect. And he just said that line of like, "What was first just a dream? A frightful example to those who may oppose us." And I'm just like, oh, chills, and Lars Mikkelsen just commands the room. Like I totally agree with you, Dominic, on nitpicks about the last 3 episodes or so compared to the final 2. But like when Lars is just on screen, all my attention's to him. Like he just commands the room. Like Balin was a great Balin and Shin are great villains, and I love and rest in peace, Ray Stevenson. I love you. I love Balin. He's one of my favorite things about that show. But like just Thrawn just commanded the room. Like you knew, oh, this guy in charge. He just had that presence, and it's like, oh, that like. And that's why I will always love Ahsoka, especially episode 6. Is like, this is my little heir to the Empire dream come true after so many years, and like, oh. But yeah, go ahead, Dominic. What were you gonna say?
It's so powerful. The music is so good. The buildup is so good. Lars is such a presence that it completely covers up the fact that line makes no sense. That line is entirely for the audience. Why he would say that to somebody in the universe makes no sense. But it's one of those instances where it's so good you don't care. And I count myself in there as well because it is so good. I don't care, even though it doesn't make any sense. But I love it.
I agree. I think Lars Mikkelsen playing Thrawn as a character, and I think sometimes Thrawn is a character, period. But I think Lars Mikkelsen is a character. I think he can be one of those characters who can say just about anything and make you believe his bullshit, even if it's completely.
Yeah.
What are you saying? It's like you don't care. Like I know some characters on TV shows who are like, "Oh, you got such a great actor, so charismatic. I'm buying everything, even though it makes no sense." But no, I love Thrawn the story, and I love the campaign. I think sometimes the battles. I think later on the battles are pretty good, but like I think what makes Thrawn great in this book is just his grand strategy. Maybe not necessarily battle by battle. I think later Thrawn books will get into more like those individual naval battles, and this is where Tim Zahn starts showing off. I'm a naval warfare guy. But the kind of the grand strategy of like, here's Thrawn, got like this little mini fleet, maybe like some rump imperial state somewhere out there. They're kind of vague of the wider state of the galaxy outside of like Empire, the rump state, and the New Republic runs everything else. Later essential guides and stuff will fill in those gaps later, decades later. But I love the grand strategy of like, okay, Thrawn has these resources. I need this. I need that. I need this. Everything's prepped. Campaign. And just the way it all works is very titular, and I love it. And obviously we introduced the art thing, where it's like he understands the species by understanding its art. It gets a little super powery at the beginning, I think, especially that first scene where he kind of knows, like, how do you deduct that by just looking at the picture of the species, I guess. Weirdly, Star Wars Rebels has the best use of the art power, where he deduces the Rebel base by kind of lowering down the planet and then looking at the old star map and then kind of making the calculations. I know I make it sound like it's BS, but actually, if you watch Rebels, it's like it's the best use of the art power. But I just love kind of Thrawn's just tactics, and I also love, and this is something I love about this book in general, I love the dynamics of just the villains in general. I love this like bad guy family grouping of like, you got Thrawn, he's the calm one. You got Rook, the muscle bodyguard. You got it's always like Sabayos is going, I'm the leader of the Empire. And Thrawn's like, yes, Lord. And then Pelion just hiding behind Thrawn going, I'm an adult. Mr. Sabayos scary. Like, I love the dynamic they all have with each other. It's such a, I always love reading chapters with just all of them there. It's like Thrawn, this guy, Sabayos kind of creepy. He's giving me the eye. And like, Sabayos, Thrawn's like, just ignore him, Pelion. We have Empire to do. But no, what you make of like Thrawn just in the book and just like the campaign and plan and all that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, like the space battles and that sort of thing is never my favorite part of a Star Wars book. I find it very difficult for the books to capture the sort of the energy and the speed and the pace of those sequences in a movie. And that's a reason why I've largely shied away from reading things that are overly pilot focused. I never got into the Rogue Squadron stuff, or the Wraith Squadron stuff, or any of those sorts of things, because it just sort of side of things, when it takes place in the other books, those are the parts where I'm sort of skimming a little bit.
Sure.
That said, I love the Alphabet Squadron books. I think Alex Freed did such a good job with those, but that comes down to the characters, and as you're saying, the characters are strong, and in those sequences where you get the back and forth between Thrawn and Joruus and Paleon, and there's this sort of like each one is bringing a different perspective to the table, and nobody's quite sure who's really in charge. Like there's an element of it could go either way, because Thrawn is the smart one. He is the one who should be in charge, but Joruus is just such a chaos agent that he could, if he wanted to, he could kill everybody. He could kill all the Imperial, whatever's left of Imperial High Command, and take over for himself. He wouldn't accomplish anything because he's not capable of doing anything with it, of thinking tactically. But he could do that if he wanted to. He could insert himself in that position of power. Whereas Thrawn maybe physically couldn't take on, this crazy Jedi clone. But, he is the one who would come up with the actual tactics that, come this close to, putting the New Republic in a chokehold.
Agreed. And one thing I think, and again, what I think Tim Zahn gets so right about Thrawn in this book, which kind of gets lost in later stuff, where again I feel like he's Zahn's kind of forgetting Thrawn's the villain. I'm gonna mix up Thrawn and Zahn. Is I think this is also a thing a lot of fans do as well. Thrawn things like Thrawn could lead the Empire because he's not the Emperor. He is just pure logic, right? He doesn't do that dark side silliness and whatnot. And to some extent, it's true. It's like I don't think Thrawn cares about the Force as like a same way Palpatine and Vader do.
No, yeah,
but I do think ultimately Thrawn is more like the Emperor than I think fans want to give him credit for, because I think Thrawn's overconfidence was his weakness. He believed in himself a little too much. He looked at the way he treated the Nogri. He was like, it's like people are like, oh, Thrawn's an alien, so he's not racist. No, he's totally racist, just a non-chist. I mean, I think he's even a little racist towards humans, where it's like, yes, Pelion, your little tiny human mind will one day comprehend my views. But with the Nogri, it's like typical Imperial brutality towards them. It's like, you are my servants, you will obey, you will do what I say. Also, I'm tricking you and not healing your plant, like I said, and that ultimately is why Rook betrays him. I mean, Rook turns on him, like he finds out, like, hey, wait a minute. And then Thrawn's like, wait, what happened? And then dead.
Artfully done.
Indeed. I think that is like, one of my things about Thrawn, which I think is, again, I think, Thrawn like to act like I'm a connoisseur of your art. It's like, no, you kind of take people's art and you treat it like toys. Like, again, that's why when you rewatch Rebels, which I'm going to turn this to Rebels and Ahsoka talk as well. Really, I think, and this is where I think Dave gets Thrawn, rewatch the final episode and the moment between Ezra and Thrawn. Because in my opinion, that moment clearly tells me everything I know about Thrawn. That is that character personified. That speech he gives in the finale to Ezra, it's like, I think basically he summed it up with basically saying, who matters, what matters not, it's irrelevant. What matters is who has power. And then he takes it to the Emperor. That whole speech is, I think, Thrawn's ethos. And it comes from this book. And I think that is why the Nogri turn on him, and where I think eventually the Knights are going to turn on Thrawn too. They weren't happy when he destroyed their temple. But what did you make of Thrawn's defeat and his relationship with the Nogri, kind of building up to all of that?
Well, it's I think you nailed it. His overconfidence is his weakness. He couldn't see them as people. He couldn't get over his own biases, and he also believed his own hype. Right? Like he didn't think anything anybody did could actually undermine him, and and he has this blind spot for the Nogri, who he clearly has a very simple view of. He doesn't respect their culture. He doesn't respect their way of doing things beyond what they can do for him. And it makes for a really, really, really great arc for Leia in the story, that she gets to be the one. We get to actually see Leia be a diplomat, which we don't really get to see her do in the original trilogy or any of the movies, really. She gets to be that diplomat, go in there and understand the Nogri culture in a way that Thrawn just never does. He doesn't bother. He thinks he can learn everything he needs from the art. He doesn't bother to actually get to know the people. He doesn't actually get to know them. And she uncovers the truth of what the Empire has done to their homeworld, and through her actions, through her kindness, through her willingness to listen and act on their behalf, she wins them over. It's genuine diplomacy. Like that's what she's supposed to do. That obviously the prequels didn't exist at this point, but like that's what Padme was all about, right? Like that. This is Leia channeling her mother in a way that doesn't make sense in our real world timeline. But if we retcon it in our heads, that's a very that is a belief in the power of democracy, diplomacy, and believing in people, and accomplishing something and getting and bringing people together. It's really beautiful. It's a really, really great storyline, and it's so perfectly done that it's not Luke cutting his head off. It's not Leia shooting him. It's not Han and Chewie ripping him apart. It's his own bodyguard from people that he abused for years that gets him.
It's actually kind of interesting how Thrawn as a villain is very impersonal to our main trio, right? Where it's like Thrawn never meets them. No, I don't think Thrawn never meets Luke, Han, and Leia the entire time. He is just on a Star Destroyer most of the time. Like closest person he meets to the heroes is Mara Jade or Talon Karrde, but outside, which I love the little moment between Thrawn and Mara Jade, where Thrawn's like, "Look, I know you're not the only Emperor's hand out there." It's like I knew the real secret. Just funny. But yeah, it's very interesting how it's actually kind of funny how in Rebels, Thrawn has a more personal relationship to the Rebels crew than he does with Luke, Han, and Leia. Like I guess that I want to turn to Ahsoka thing, but I always feel like I want to think low, like you can tell Thrawn's just bitter at Ezra for beating him. Like he wants Ezra dead. He still wants to escape. It's like I just want that little blue-haired boy just when his space whales destroyed with prejudice. I love it. But no, you're right. It is very prequely. One of those things like maybe there was some clairvoyance or something within the air, but yeah, it's Leia's channeling Padme in that moment. I want to move on to Sabayoth as our third villain in the trio, because I think Sabayoth is very interesting. Because again, the archetypes are kind of all over the place. Like Thrawn and Sabayoth are weirdly both the Emperor, and Sabayoth is both Vader at the same time. I always said in terms of like canon, I think there's a little bit of Snoke and Balin in there too. Kind of want to split the characters a little bit. I think it's that interesting about Sabayoth is he at first disses the Emperor, and then he just basically wants to be the Emperor. Because at the beginning of the book, he's like, I don't care about ruling planets or fleets. It's boring. I can rule this one world. I can control everyone's mind. Like, that's power. Like, I can control individuals through their heads. Like, why would I care about ruling a bunch of systems I'm never going to visit? That sounds boring. And then as he kind of joins the Empire and kind of enjoys like the whole battle meditations thing, which little side tangent, but I love that's the introduction to battle meditation, which is kind of a retcon as to why the Empire acts the way it does on Endor. It's Tim Zahn's way of explaining that I find both funny, but it's a cool power. But as Sabayoth enjoys that a little bit more and more, he's like, maybe I will become Emperor, but I'll do it by controlling everyone's mind. It's like, establish a Sabayocracy, a government after Sabayoth or the Sabayoth. He gets really obsessed with like trading the new order of Jedi with Luke. And I always find that scene in Jormac hilarious, where Luke is like, something seems off about this George guy, but I guess he's a Jedi. And then Sabayoth is like, here's a dispute, Force lightning, and Luke's still like, something doesn't seem right. I don't think that Sabayoth is healthy.
And it's so funny reading it now with our current conception of Jedi that like nobody would ever accept that maybe this guy's got something to him if you read it now. Like that you again, this is that fun of like the universe is not established yet. Because if we read this now, when you read this now, you're like, how the Luke, what the F? What are you doing? Why do you even remotely trust this guy? It's so patently obvious that he's evil or that there's something wrong with him. But at a time when, we hadn't, all the powers hadn't been locked into as a power of this side or a power of that side. And, we didn't know what Jedi training was beyond just a little bit of Yoda and a little bit of Ben in the original trilogy. You could see like, okay, maybe this is like, this is the like alternate Jedi training. It's not, it's not the standardized version, but it's not necessarily completely out of the ordinary necessarily either.
It looks like I guess maybe some Jedi had giant palaces to themselves. I don't know. I wasn't there. Right? No, not everyone has to be in a hut or a little temple. Yeah, maybe sometimes Jedi are a little bit harsher than I imagine. Electrical judgment's fine. But no, I find Sabayoth interesting, especially because again, this is also talk about pre-90s. This is one thing I love about pre-90 90 Star Wars is no one really knows what the Sith are. No one knows what the Jedi are either. But the Jedi have always kind of been a little bit more of a consistent thing. Obviously, the prequels really cement what the Order was like. But the Jedi, the Jedi, I think in terms of an ideology and a physique have always kind of been the same. I mean, new things like the whole attachment, romance, marriage thing added later. I always have a suspicion that George didn't want Luke because Mary was like, I'm Luke Skywalker. I didn't have a good marriage, so he can't. Martha.
George. Maybe he's softening his stance now that he is in a good marriage, and
that's true. Maybe that's just my silly thing. I don't have to do that. But again, it's like Sabayoth is not a Sith. I mean, he's a crazy clone, but he's not a Sith. It was back in the time where it's like Vader was a Sith, and we didn't know what that meant. And the Emperor was actually never confirmed to be a Sith. He's just a Darksider who's just Emperor. So I also find that really cool as well.
That is something I'll say about Splinter of the Mind's Eyes. They do drop the word Sith in there. To describe Darth Vader. And of course, there's the deleted scene or extended scene from A New Hope with the officers where one of them says something about the Emperor sending a Sith Lord. So yeah, you're right. It's one of those things that kind of lingered there and it hadn't really been established. And your boy Tom Veach and Kevin J. Anderson, the two of them, started to fill in some of those gaps in the comics until George came along and really filled them in with the prequels.
Oh, absolutely. But what do you make of Sabayoth? Both the character, his arc, the concept of the crazy clone. I mean, what do you make of the whole of the cloning aspect as well? Especially because we've got a lot of cloning stuff as of late, and obviously since the prequels. So what do you make of just all of that?
Yeah, well, I like it in the sense that like it's fun again to look at this and go, oh, so they didn't know about the Clone Wars. They didn't know all the clones were of Jango Fett and yada yada yada. So like, there's a lot of guessing at what the Clone Wars might have been and what this could have looked like. And so I like that they, that this is there. It's like it's a relic of a different time. As for Sabayoth, like it's not really like my favorite character in this. Some of his chapters did get a little repetitive. I found, he serves his purpose well in the story, but he wasn't one of the characters. It wasn't like Thrawn or any of the Nogri characters where I've really felt drawn to learn more about him. You kind of got the picture of who he was, even if you didn't know the specifics pretty early on. And from that point on, it was just sort of like, all right, let's play this out. Let's see how this goes. And you got some good action sequences and some interesting scenes out of it. But ultimately, it didn't. That's if I had to pick a part of the trilogy that interests me least, it might be him.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I gotta ask, was Luke Skywalker too far for you? Where do you stand on the Luke of it all?
I don't mind there being an evil clone of Luke. Like that feels very, pulpy serial. Like that's in the spirit of kind of like the OG George stuff. The added like adding the vowels in there, it's silly, but it's just kind of funny. Like it's sort of funny, and I get that you need a way to quickly convey it on the page which one is Luke and which one is the evil clone, because you're using up valuable word count and character count and page space if you're every time typing Luke's evil clone draws his lightsaber, Luke's evil clone attacks, Luke's evil clone parries. It's much easier just to add the one extra character and have Luke attacks, Luke draws his lightsaber, Luke parries the blow. Like, so I sort of like respect it from like a sort of like a just the writer needing to convey this as simply and as succinctly as possible. It's a little silly, but so much of Star Wars is a little silly that I can't get myself really worked up about it.
No, that's fair. Also, this is the introduction of Mount Tantus. Big
Bad Batch.
Yeah. I got a question. I bet you when you were reading the book, you kind of envisioned Mount Tantus as in the Bad Batch.
Oh yeah, 1000%.
Oh, absolutely. And great about Bad Batch is like they really nailed what you kind of imagined the book. If you haven't never seen Bad Batch, what you kind of imagined Mount Tantus would look like. So great on them for that. Let's go back to Luke for a second. That is how Mara Jade kind of gets a little bit of a loophole in her Palpatine contacting her through her head by killing Luke Skywalker. So Mara Jade. I think this is probably my favorite incarnate. I mean, I've never read anything beyond this original interpretation of Mara Jade, so I never got to really see what she was like as Luke's wife and Mother of Ben, stuff like that. It was even funny enough. It's kind of funny how, because this wasn't planned, they never actually planned for Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade to get married. And there was actually some back and forth of like, well, Luke also got a computer ghost Jedi girl whose name escapes me at the Callista. Got Callista. Luke's had some other girlfriends at the time. So it is kind of funny how, when Tim Zahn came back and kind of did the book that kind of ended the 90s era of Star Wars, he put his foot down. It's like, nope, Luke and Mara are getting together. I'm kind of streamlining all this. There's a lot of back and forth between authors, because they all had kind of little different visions. But I think Tim Zahn was correct. I think out of all of Luke's potential girlfriends and love interests at the time, there was something special about Mara Jade. It's kind of funny how Mara Jade, you called her also a Vader kind of a thing. So I'm gonna dare to say it, even though I don't think it's 100%. A little bit of this is proto Reylo stuff going on. Obviously, a lot more planned out, but you're definitely. I mean, you got the chemistry there, right?
It's an enemies to lovers story. Like it is ultimately that when you take the big picture view of the expanded universe, and honestly, within the book, that is what is being set up. I think Zahn has said, if it had been up to him, they would have gotten together a lot sooner. It wouldn't have taken up until what you're describing there of needing to put a fine point on the end of the of that era. So it's definitely there's an element of that, certainly.
Agreed. And I do like, I think Mark Jade's interesting because another one of those characters where unfortunately fans, some of the leaking into legend stuff, have kind of, especially for her Empire service days, of tried to kind of, dare I say, whitewash her a little bit of she only took out the corrupt bureaucrats and the warlords, instead of what I think the intention is. The original book was no, she was Palpatine's go-to assassin. She thought she It sounds like she thought she was Vader.
She was an Inquisitor, it's
Yeah.
essentially is what she was.
Almost like
I was gonna say, like, there was some thought, like, when the Inquisitors were being like first developed, like maybe that's how they could insert this character into canon. But age-wise, it'd be a bit of a stretch because you do kind of need her and Luke to be roughly the same age if that's the storyline you want to do. Maybe you don't want to do that, but
you want to know a funny Mara Jade thought?
Mm.
You know the episodes of Clone Wars, Holocron Heist, and the one where the Palpatine's getting the babies, the babies. I remember watching those episodes back in the day when I thought it was all canon and connected and stuff like that, and they're like, "Oh, this is how Palpatine gets Mara Jade." I've always thought that Mara Jade was one of those. She was raised as a child by the Emperor to be like his personal assassin and stuff like that. But no, I think that the character's really good. I love kind of how she at first doesn't really care about the politics. I think she kind of misses the Empire, but she knows it's gone. She obviously wants Luke dead because, it's like, I had this good life as the Emperor's assassin and you killed the Emperor. And she was all for the Emperor. And then kind of by the end, she's realizing maybe the Emperor wasn't a good guy after all. And, like her talk with Leia of like, Leia's like, my planet was destroyed by the Empire. That's kind of bad. And they're definitely like, they're definitely kind of some moments where it's like, it kind of feels a little weird where she goes like, this isn't Palpatine's Empire anymore. This is Thrawn's Empire, with Mount Tantus and Sabaoth. But I do think kind of overall she kind of comes to the conclusion like, maybe the Emperor wasn't such a great guy. Maybe I gotta let go and atone a little bit for my sins. Or just work with Talon Karrde because he's not that bad. But yeah, I always love Mara Jade. I love the fact, I think she works well with Luke. She's the fiery, cliche, but fiery, angry redhead. A little cliche back then, I'm sure. But and Luke kind of the calm. He's kind of the farm boy. He's like Superman. It's like a Superman Lois, with Lois more evil, I guess. Which I think is very cute and fun. What do you make of Mara Jade? Like I'm sure you know Mara Jade for a while, but like, what do you see her in her introduction?
Yeah, it's like I said off the top, it's sort of fun to put Luke in this situation where he knows that like somebody being on the dark side isn't a death sentence. What Yoda says, once you start down the dark path forever, will it dominate your destiny? It isn't necessarily true. And I think he wants to do for any darksider that he finds what he did with his father. And here is now somebody, however, who has a very personal beef with him and doesn't like him specifically. So how does he navigate that? It's a new challenge for Luke. But in doing so, she also stands on her own as her own character. She is not simply a plot element for Luke to to overcome. For as much as he challenges her, she challenges him. Like the two of them, you get a real interesting dynamic between the two characters. And you also you get to have a story of somebody grappling with the fact that they were part of something evil. This is like kind of what I was talking about earlier, where you can have these stories where people who were part of something awful and they come to realize it, and now they have to question what do you do now? How do you accept your role in something awful and then choose to move forward? And that's a really interesting. Yeah. And so that's a really interesting story for a character, and it, like you said, it plays out really well, and the scenes between her and Leia were excellent, and a great introduction to a great character, and it does sort of feel like it's only a matter of time before she finds her way into the story, the current canon storytelling in some way. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you you would want the romance there with Luke, because that is a big part of the story, but I don't know how you do that given The Last Jedi and The Last Jedi's existence. So maybe there's something there. I don't know. That's why they're smarter than me. Like that, theoretically, the guys who write that.
It's interesting because again, I feel like the whole Luke doesn't fall in love thing is something they're kind of keeping. At least this group of people very, because I think George was so big on it before he retired. So it's kind of hard to tell. Like, how do you do that? I mean, I guess And there's also like, I feel like Mara Jade's kind of being splinted off to different characters in terms of like Luke's relationship with people. Like, Afra's not going to fall in love with Luke and say she's lesbian. But there is kind of a little bit of that. Luke's the farm boy and Afra's the chaos agent. He's a little wacky, but they're fun together. And then you get in the new comics, Luke kind of got this friend who really likes him, but obviously Luke's doing Jedi stuff. I want the joke of just saying, just make Mara Jade a sequel era and have Rey and her be a thing. You can be an Exegol agent who.
There you go. There you go.
That's how I do it. And the judge would hate it. I would love it. But yeah. I love Mara Jade. She's great. I like Talon Card. He's cool. I think he's very suave. He's like Han Solo, the boss.
Yeah.
You already talked about him a little bit. He's Talon Card, kind of again my Sabayos, a little bit of the weaker side stuff.
Sure.
It's not my favorite thing. But let's talk about something that you brought up that you previewed before and some Underworld stuff when we teased this. Talk about good old Boris Falia, Proto Senator Ziono. Boris Falia as sort of the symbolism of kind of the bureaucratic nature of the New Republic as the rebels form a government now. He'll go on to be a lot of people's favorite. He's always just causing trouble, and he got the whole Akbar side plot, which I think they should take for Ahsoka season 2. Have Akbar be in a political scandal before he has to take on Thrawn. That'd be fun.
I think Akbar is in Ahsoka season 2 because he never actually got to face off against Thrawn in the books, and so they're like, "What can we do that's different? All right, let's put him up against Akbar." Of course,
I thought Akbar was there in the final battle. Really
yeah, but
I mean, I guess you're right. Thrawn kind of died by his
yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But what do you make of Boris Falia? And also, let's just kind of splinter it. What do you make of the New Republic characters outside Luke Conway? Because this is where I think characters like Mon Mothma get a little bit more established as well, as the leaders of the Rebel Alliance.
Garm Bel Iblis or whatever his name is.
Proto Saw because he doesn't like.
Yeah. I liked seeing the New Republic infighting. I liked because it is a fundamental truth about people that people want power. And, Palpatine is wrong about so very many things, but all those who gain power are afraid to lose it is pretty on point. Is pretty on point. And so the Rebel Alliance is an alliance of rebellions. They are brought together by a shared cause, which is needing to remove the Empire, remove the Emperor. Once that shared outcome has been achieved, can they keep working together? Do their wants, do they still line up? Do they still work together? And and then there are the people that just see this as an opportunity for self-advancement, and that's what you get with Borisk. What's his name? Boris Kvalia, yeah. That's what you get with him, and he's literally just playing politics. He's drumming up a scandal to put down Akbar so that he can rise to himself. It's some House of Cards stuff. Like it's it's a real sort of political thriller, political maneuvering where you're not trying to backstab the other side. You're backstabbing your own side for your own advancement through the halls of government and the halls of power. So it's a great subplot, and it complicates things on the hero's side in a way that the films just didn't have time for.
No, I agree. It was nice, and again, we can see Mon Mothma. This is kind of where she starts to really cement herself as a secondary character. It isn't like Andor. She's taken the spotlight, but this is where she kind of entered what I call her primary, secondary thing. Character.
Yeah, I was just disappointed we didn't have a big dance party with her. That's what I was looking forward to. We need to have a dancing crash out with Mon Mothma.
And pair in there for some reason.
Character that doesn't exist for another 40 years. Exactly. He's there. He's there, I tell you. He's just not mentioned, but he's there the whole time.
Like in Legends, Mon Mothma had a son and not a daughter, and the son fought in the Battle of Hoth.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I know, very interesting. But no,
Tony Gilroy was like, "That's a bridge too far. I can't deal with that."
no, can't deal with that. We'll get to the main trio. I know we're running kind of low on time, but I want to ask one more thing. We're missing on so many characters like Winter and all that stuff. I love this book. There's so much to talk about. I do want to ask though, because this is a controversial point among the book, and fans of the book. Why'd you make a Deltasaurus just being a plant, like an actual plant in the garden? I have a friend who does not like that.
I don't mind it for the same reason I don't mind the Purrgil. I like the idea of the triumph of nature over the machines.
Mhm.
And I like the idea that, like, hyperspace actually its origin isn't somebody programming a computer. It's these whales that figured out how to go really, really fast. And so I like the idea that, yeah, the ultimate source, like, it's a little convenient that it's just there. But I like the idea of the triumph of nature over the machine. So the thematic idea and the spirit of it worked for me. And so I was okay with the conveniences of at this point in the story, it's too late to send somebody to another planet to explore and find it. Maybe this is one thing that maybe could have been worked into the story earlier and but it was what it was.
That's fair.
Yeah,
All right.
to send somebody to the other planet to like find the truth of it, and it's the Drengir or some stuff like that.
Fair enough. Okay, let's we're never running low on time, so I guess we should talk about our trio. This book has so much. It's like it's almost feels bad we can't talk about all of it for 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about the trio: Luke, Han, and Leia. I really like Lando and Chewie, of course, they're there. No, I was gonna say I think Luke and Leia probably get the most to do out of the trio. Obviously, we have Luke. He's definitely, you know, I. This is where I'm going to get a little controversial. I can sometimes sympathize with people who don't like Last Jedi Luke. I love Last Jedi Luke.
Yeah.
Here's why I sometimes can sympathize, because again, you're going from Return of the Jedi to Last Jedi, and that's like a whoa whiplash. Like what happened? I can kind of see people not always kind of like adjusting right away. Luke in this, it's very much what I think a lot of people wanted, but also it's very much like just the character's like a little older, a little wiser. He's still Luke at the end of the day. It's hard, but he definitely had his big moment. He's a little wiser. He definitely still falls for stuff like Sabayos. And he's just trying to find out, his place now. Now the Jedi Order, trying to figure out how am I going to do this. What am I going to do? He feels uncomfortable being in the Imperial Palace, which is not the Jedi Temple. That was later. This is the difference. Like, what am I doing here in Palpatine's palace? This feels wrong. I can just feel all the weirdness and evil still, like the remnant evil here, and kind of deal with kind of what happened. Not to meet Mara and that, and again, Leia, she's pregnant, but she's also doing her diplomatic stuff. She definitely kind of is dealing with being, kind of dealing with the legacy of being Vader's daughter.
Lady Vader,
which she kind of uses to get the Novi on side. She got to give birth to Jay and Jason. I think they get the most to do in the trilogy. Han's he definitely gets his smuggler contact and kind of does that. But he's also kind of there. It's a little bit more Return of the Jedi Han, where again, you can make the argument he's kind of there.
He's gone legit.
He's gone legit. He's definitely, kind of there. Because again, doesn't really get much of a grander arc. Although it's always fun when he, goes to Port Leia, even though he's grumpy. Get to see Lando with new business, which is always fun. And Chewie's been the droids, or Chewie the droids. But no, I think Zahn really captures their voices. He really captures their characters. Really captures, again, that spirit of the original trilogy. And, this is a continuation of the original trilogy. This is the next chapter. The truest next chapter in that there's no big time jump or anything like that. But what do you make of the trio in the story? How they're used and their
Yeah.
arcs?
Yeah, so like we talked about Leia, and I think they did a really good job. I think Zahn did a really good job of like giving her a story, and yeah, he's put this limitation on the character that she is pregnant, so like she can't do as much like action sequences and that sort of thing. So what other skills does she have? Well, we always knew she was I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan. Like, she's got that side to her. So he leaned into that. Luke, like you said, that's sort of the clearest one of like, well, where do you go next from Return of the Jedi? Well, he starts figuring out the Jedi Academy thing and figuring out how to restart the Jedi Order. And by the way, I agree with you. I don't see Luke's characterization as a flaw for me in The Last Jedi, but I understand and respect why people do. I don't necessarily agree with it, and I don't subscribe to the same thing, but I don't think people are wrong for feeling that way, because that is a very natural reaction to seeing a character be so very different. And yeah, there are plenty of legitimate criticisms of The Last Jedi, and I think that's one of them if you felt that way. There's plenty of illegitimate criticisms of The Last Jedi, but that, as I said, is not one of them.
Right.
But this iteration of Luke, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Han, like you said, he's the hardest one to really figure out, because what makes Han cool is his underworld connections, is his, like, he's the smuggler, he's the scoundrel. That's what makes him cool. And he winds up going straight and being on the straight and narrow path by the end of Return of the Jedi. And he's still kind of got the swagger and the cool, and he's wonderful, we are now part of the tribe. Great, just what I always wanted. Like, he's still got
Yeah.
like that element to him, but like, where does he go next? Does he become a part of the New Republic? That doesn't really make sense. Doesn't really feel true to him. So, sending him out as like sort of an emissary to the underworld and trying to rally the smugglers to their side, yeah, that sort of makes sense. But I absolutely understand why J.J. Abrams did what he did with Han in The Force Awakens and had him basically go back to it. And JJ, for as much as I disagree with some of his later decisions, I think his rationale for basically putting Han and Leia just back where they were in the original trilogy is actually really strong, and makes a lot of sense, that it's a response to the trauma that they went through with Ben Solo's fall to the dark side. That Han says, I went back to the only thing I was ever any good at, and Leia says, we all did. And yeah, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Like, I think that's something that I think JJ absolutely nails in the sequels, and it allows us to find Han in a place that makes sense for Han Solo. He would feel weird. There's that AI image that's being floated around amongst in certain circles I've seen on social media of Jedi Luke and New Republic Han, that the people are saying this is what we wanted in this episode 7. I'm like, that would not have felt right. It would have felt so very weird to have Han in that sort of situation. And JJ was right to put him back where he was, and he came up with a really powerful and tragic and beautiful reason for it.
Oh, Han's arc in Force Awakens is, I think, the
It's
truest
excellent.
conclusion. It's beautiful. I think.
Excellent. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like, that's how you end Han Solo, honestly.
Yeah. And his cameo in Rise of Skywalker is really good too. Like, that's a really
absolutely
effective way to do it. And yeah, I remember when Carrie passed, because really that should be Leia doing that. Well, I remember thinking, well, there's Harris, there's how you get Harrison back into it. And again, I have a lot of issues with the Rise of Skywalker, but that scene is not one of them. I think JJ, Harrison, Terrio, and Adam Driver all nailed it there.
Oh yeah, like I agree. Like, that's one of the few scenes, and I won't get into it too much because I don't want to make too much data. But, like, I will go to bat for that scene and why it needs to be on over, like, when people say it should have been Anakin. Like, I have a whole spiel. I won't get into it right now. But that's a scene I go to bat for out of everything. But yeah, I agree.
I'm really tempted to go into the why it has to be Han too, but let's continue with let's stay on target. Stay on target.
But no, I think the trio are used very effectively. And I do, again, find it fascinating how They never beat Thrawn. Like I think maybe Han sees the back of his head in a scene. I forget if like they get a glimpse of him for like a second. But I find it interesting. Like I actually kind of think this is interesting. How I mean, this is kind of could be like our final topic about legacy of this book. How we call this the Thrawn Trilogy. It's very much focused on Thrawn. We fans love Thrawn.
Mm-hmm.
In an odd way, Heir of the Empire, at least the first book. You can make the argument: is Thrawn really the heir of the Empire? I mean, I think today you could say yes, but play a little devil's advocate here for a hot second. That could be Thrawn.
Mm-hmm.
Could be Mara Jade. Could be
Mhm.
even Sabayos. I mean, he wants to be emperor by the end. I think Thrawn was the standout character of the Thrawn trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
But in the context of 1991, this is just more Luke, Han, and Leia. Thrawn's just the bad guy that a new bad guy we discovered.
Yeah.
Thrawn did not become kind of the glorious myth that he is now, and you can definitely tell with Ahsoka by the first line of it where he appears that makes no sense. You love it anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that's also kind of interesting about kind of how the trio are used and kind of seeing their adventure. And I think what also is so interesting about this book, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is like, again, the story is the in-between story. So I think it's interesting how there are galactic stakes in a way. I mean, Coruscant does get attacked. But I think this book is so good at being both large scale, but also kind of small scale at the same time. I mean, not super small scale, but certainly not in the same vein as like the three saga trilogy movie that we see. And I'm just kind of curious, like, what your thoughts on all that are, and kind of my rambling as we reach the end here.
Yeah, it's interesting about Thrawn, right? And he doesn't have a personal connection with the heroes, and that's something it's rarer and rarer to see in stories. And I blame The Empire Strikes Back for that, like across the board, not just in Star Wars, but especially in Star Wars, is that the I am your father twist was so good and so shocking that everybody wants their version of it. And so they want a version of, can you believe that I am, we have this connection, you and I, hero and villain, we have this connection. And, Spaceballs roasts this perfectly with, I am your father's brother's cousin's former roommate. Like, there isn't really a connection between the two characters, but they are at odds. And, Zahn does a really, really good job of creating a villain who stands on his own. He isn't defined by his relationship to the heroes. He's defined on his own terms. Yes, there are characters. Yes, there's a villain who is, related, who's kind of defined by their relationship to the main characters and in Mara Jade and wanting to kill Luke Skywalker. But also you have Thrawn, and he's just Thrawn. He's not secretly, Luke Skywalker's uncle. He's not Han Solo's former mentor. He's not any of that. He is just a really threatening villain who threatens what our characters hold dear, and they must stop him at all costs. And it works. It shows that it can work. You don't have to make every villain, not everybody has to be related to somebody else. The villain can just be something new.
Or connected, not in the latest, like some connected.
Yeah, connected. Yeah. And that's I mean, you see this in so many, so much contemporary storytelling that inevitably the antagonist and the protagonist have some like deep connection. Sometimes it's known, sometimes it isn't, going into the story. And I do think like that comes from the fact that Empire Strikes Back was so good that so many people tried to do that, and some people did it very, very successfully, that it became ingrained in like a generation of writers that that's how you have to tell the story. But it's not necessarily.
Yeah, and it's even interesting, like in Rebels and Ahsoka, obviously Thrawn doesn't have like the, like I am, like I killed your father, Ezra, that kind of connection, thank God. But he did meet the Rebels characters. He met Hera twice.
Well, yeah, in Rebels, like the rivalry is built up between the characters over the course of the seasons.
Right.
There wasn't an inherent rivalry there at the beginning, other than they are on opposite sides of the war. But over the course of the 2 seasons that Thrawn is involved in, so I'm doing Richard Nixon peace symbols here. Across those 2 seasons, they build up that rivalry through consistently meeting each other, consistently besting each other on the battlefield. I mean, the Rebels best Thrawn a lot more than he does them, but you get to that point where by the end it does feel personal, which is again is another effective way of doing storytelling. But it never comes with that reveal, like you said, of Ezra, I am your father. It's like no, we don't need that.
I actually kind of find that interesting. I find that both interesting in a weird way, where I mean, I guess we can kind of, this is the final thing of like speculation and kind of where Filoni taking his influences of, in this book, Thrawn doesn't have a vendetta against Luke and Leia outside of, I guess, they destroyed the Empire, we got to kick them off. But it's very, it's very surgical, right? It's just like, we got to destroy them because we're the rebels and we got to destroy the Empire. I do think it is kind of interesting in Ahsoka. There's a little bit of that vendetta against Ezra. I can tell Thrawn has a little bit of a twinge of like, I really hate this kid. And I hate his Purgles, his stupid space whales. Like he's not going full vendetta mode, but you can kind of tell. If you ever rewatch it, you just look for like the twinges in his face and the way Lars says things. Like he doesn't like Ezra, and he would gladly like him dead. And I'd be very curious to see, like, again, it's like when you meet Hera Syndulla, like, my old rival. It's like I can tell, like, I'm gonna enjoy this a little bit. I do think it's interesting having Thrawn have some rivalry with these rebel characters in canon Thrawn trilogy. I don't know. I just think that's neat.
Yeah, it's gonna be fascinating. Ahsoka season 2's got to, it's gonna do a lot to enhance our understanding of Thrawn as a villain. He's been reintroduced. He's been talked up. He's been hyped up. Now we need to see him be a genuine threat to the safety of the New Republic, a genuine threat to our heroes, and I think that's kind of one of the keys for season 2 to succeed. And then once that works, then we can sort of start looking into where you can pull things from this and put the Mandoverse spin on it. Rook seems to be off the table because they dealt with that in Rebels. So who could fill that role? Well, if I'm just sort of guessing at who we have now, maybe Shin could potentially, if she finds her way back into Imperial service, could potentially fulfill that role.
Others, they I don't think.
Yeah, they don't trust each other one bit. I think that the Night Sister coffins that they brought back and what we saw of like the zombie troopers, I think that's maybe this iteration of the story's version of the clones. And then like there isn't really a Jorah character. Some people thought maybe Balin would kind of be that, but he's off on his own thing. And maybe it's crazy because he's like trying to get into Mortis, but he doesn't want anything to do with Thrawn. He wanted to get to Peridia to explore the larger mysteries of the Force, and he was just him and Morgan Elsbeth just happened to share the same goal of wanting to get there. She wanted to get there for Thrawn. He wanted to get there for whatever the heck is going on with those statues.
I call that he has. I want to talk to the manager energy. I want to talk to the manager energy. The Force, please. I'm tired of this like dark thing.
I want to talk to the father. I want to talk to father, the son, and the daughter, please. So it's gonna be fascinating. Like I don't know how much we can pull directly from this. I cannot think of a better way for Thrawn to end than what we saw here. And so I do think that like his ultimate defeat in a movie won't be Din Djarin shooting him or Ezra Bridger stabbing him or Ahsoka, taking him out in some way. It will be him being betrayed by one of his own, because that is sort of where he is most blind. And right now Shin feels like perhaps maybe the strongest candidate, but she's not with him right now. She's still on Peridia. But you have to assume by the time we get out of season 2, everybody's going to be back in the main galaxy, so that the inevitable, the Filoni movie that will inevitably be titled Heir to the Empire will, allow people to faction up, whether they want to be on Thrawn's side or Hera's side, and go from
We're
there.
calling it now, though, that his final words are, "It was so artistically done."
Yeah, it has to be. I like Dave. You're a great writer in so many ways. You have such a wonderful handle on the Force and Star Wars, what George taught you. But man, I don't know. Like, you bring it in this character and you're gonna try and kill him off, and you're gonna come up with something that's better than the OG. I mean, more power to you if you can come up with it. But man, that's a tough
Dave has.
nut
I
to
think
crack.
Dave.
And I think but this might be one place where change everything else, make everything else as wild as crazy. But in the end, one of Thrawn's underlings is stabbing him in the back, and he's saying it was artfully done.
Oh, can you hear me, by the way? My microphone.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
I hear you.
I was about to say, no, I think Dave's too much of a fanboy. I think he knows he needs to do that. Like, I'm glad Dave said in the celebration stuff that he's trying to hold back of Akbar saying, "It's a trap." I know, like, he said that. But the one time Dave was like, "No, embrace it. Embrace it. You need to write that down. You need to be the one who write that in the movie." But yeah, we're heading on 2:30. It's almost 8. So I think we're gonna be wrapping it up. But just final thoughts. I love this book. I love this trilogy.
Yeah.
If you don't read anything else of the post-Endor stuff, read this. You kind of have to read this if you want to read the post-Endor stuff. I mean, maybe you could start with New Jedi Order, maybe, but definitely try to read this. This is Essential Legends. I mean, that's why it is Essential Legends. It's such a good book. It captures the original trilogy so well. And again, like you said, Dominic, if you want to explore Star Wars before the prequels, kind of when no one quite knew what anything else was beyond the original trilogy, this is some good stuff to start with.
Yeah. It's a piece of Star Wars history. It's a great story in and of itself, and it's going to connect to all these new things in sort of fun ways where they're adapting it in some ways and doing their own things in other ways and taking characters and all that. Like that in and of itself, all great reasons to read it. But it's also it's a piece of history. This is the story that launched 1,000 books. All the Star Wars books and comics that we read now are in some way owe a debt to this book, because it came out, this trilogy, it came out, it re-energized the Star Wars audience that existed, and opened up the audience to the idea that, maybe Star Wars isn't just something that takes place on screen, maybe it takes place on the page as well. And many books have been written since then. Some are great, some are good, some are just okay, some are not very good, and some are bad. But all of that stems from this, and all of it, is the experimentation that the Legends verse got to do is really something to behold. Again, sometimes it doesn't work, but when it does, it's pretty great. And there's a fearlessness to those stories. To some of those stories, some of them are pretty conservative and don't want to do anything very interesting, but there's a fearlessness to some of them that, again, draw that inspiration from this book. And same thing with the canon stuff too. Everything from Aftermath to the High Republic owes some debt to it. And the High Republic did a really great job building up Marchion Ro as a great book villain.
Oh yeah.
And they have to do that because the bar is set so high by Grand Admiral Thrawn in these 3 original books.
Absolutely. So I just want to add one more thing. When I would talk about Thrawn Trilogy, I would talk about like in a group. Like I always say, I love the Thrawn Trilogy, and I rank it as like Thrawn Trilogy #1. I gotta ask, if you had to rank like the 3 books in order, what are your favorites? Like, I think for me, I like Last Command as #1, Heir of the Empire, and then Dark Force Rising. But I just like endings a lot, so that's just a me thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I will say for Dark Force Rising, the cliffhanger, the ending on that cliffhanger of like, oh my God, everything is staffed by clones, like I was reading these. I was planning to read these pretty slowly. Like I read Heir to the Empire last summer. Like I was reading it while I was going between Comic-Con and D23 last summer. And so like I read that, and then I sort of left it for a bit, and I picked up Dark Force Rising at the beginning of this year, and I got to the end of that book, and I went, well, there's something else I really want to read next, and I'm going to read that. But the next book is going to be The Last Command, because that's such a good cliffhanger that I can't wait that long to read to read it again. So I don't know. I genuinely don't know if I can rank them. Like to me, they're almost like just one entity.
No, I completely understand. I'm like that too most of the time. Again, I think I like Last Command. Again, I just like ending that Return of the Jedi thing, where it all kind of culminates, and then Heir of the Empire, the good beginning. And I always kind of forget Dark Force Rising. That's the one. That's the weak one for me. I don't know why. It's like, again, it's like the one time where Star Wars middle was not the strongest.
Yeah, the Dark Force fleet is a little bit of a goofy concept.
The Katana fleet.
Yeah, Katana fleet is a little bit of a goofy concept. So I can see where you're coming from there. And you know, but like I said, to me, I remember that cliffhanger, but like it's all, but otherwise, like they all sort of melded into one book.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, I think with that, we shall wrap things up this week. Well, thank you, Dominic, so much for coming on. This was so much fun. I'm glad you're doing some Legends work reading. That's gonna be a lot of exciting.
Yeah, it was many months in the making, this episode, because you first reached out to me about doing this right after I read Heir to the Empire, and I said, let's do the whole trilogy, so let's wait. And I have many messages from Joel over the last year or so saying, hey, are you ready to do it? Are you ready to do it? Are you ready to do it? And I kept having to delay because either I hadn't finished the books yet, or I was just completely in the throes of needing to go to Celebration, or needed to prepare to go to Celebration Japan, that it just didn't make sense to do yet another podcast on top of all the other podcasts that I was doing at that time. And so, but I'm very, very glad that we finally got to make it happen, because it was a discussion that I think, at least for me, was well worth the wait.
Oh, indeed, especially in this very long break hiatus of Star Wars after Andor. It's gonna be fun to talk about stuff. No, if you ever do Tales of the Jedi with all of them, hit me up.
I've done it. I've done Tales of the Jedi once already. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to do them again.
Kind of go back just to kind of remember what Exar Kun was all about. And
what I want to do, Joel, and maybe we should do this together.
Sure.
Is the New Jedi Order.
Ooh,
maybe we should do that. Now, I also want to do a few more of the like Bantam 90s books that lead us up to it.
That's fair.
But I do think it would be fun to do the NJO all the way through at kind of a snail's pace.
That might take a while on me, because I gotta find it and read it. But yeah, definitely. But yes, again, thank you so much. I mean, I love the Thrawn Trilogy. I love talking about it. I love talking about Legends. Like, yes, it's called Ion Canon, but I love talking about Legends and the history and kind of where all of this comes from in a strange way. So thank you so much. Anything you'd like to plug? Anything?
Tune into the Star Wars Underworld podcast Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. That's 6 p.m. Pacific, or in your podcast feeds on Fridays. We break down the latest news of the week, or sometimes we just have a conversation about something else. So tune into that. And if you want to read some Star Wars analysis and discussion, you can check out my Substack. Again, it's called Hoth Off the Press, and you can find it by going to dominicgjones.substack.com.
That's awesome. You can find me at JID20234 on Blue Sky, JID20234 on Blue Sky. We have the Ion Canon Pod on Blue Sky, where I post stuff, retweet stuff, posted some news about an interesting Han Solo comic post Endor. So there's new Han Solo comic, so more post Endor's goodness. So next week Matthew should be back, and if we have everything planned out, we are going to talk about the Death Star. What a depressing term phrase. So check us out next week. Till then, Dominic, again, thank you. All right, everybody, let's go this thing and head home.